Was I expelled from Hogwarts? Welcome back, brave explorers of impossible worlds. We are excited to have you here to continue this odyssey together. Before we continue, everything you'll hear is pure fiction. So please don't try to replicate combat techniques at home. This wonderful story in all its rights belong to its brilliant original author. We are only the messengers of entertainment. Want another dose of adventure? Subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss a single chapter. And if you can't wait, our Patreon has exclusive surprises you'll love. Chapter 1, Just got off the train, in Azkaban? London, King's Cross Station, Platform 7. It was late summer, a light drizzle falling from the eaves, trickling down the gutters. In the distance, a green steam train slowed to a stop, its whistle blaring, before finally coming to a gentle halt at the platform. The doors opened, and a young man stepped off, blonde hair, deep blue eyes, soft features, and strikingly handsome, much like a young Edward Franz. He carried a small, exquisitely crafted black leather suitcase. The young man braved the rain, walking along the flow of people through a thick wall into the King's Cross Station Hall. He had only taken a few steps when he was blocked by a group of men in black, wearing sunglasses. This scene drew the attention of many wizards. Such a large entourage. Was it the return of a young master from a pure-blooded family? But upon inquiring, they learned it was the Ministry of Magic arresting a criminal suspect, and everyone immediately scattered. The boy stopped, staring at the men in black surrounding him. His deep blue eyes narrowed, and he gripped the small black leather suitcase in his hand. The men parted to make way, and a ruddy-faced Ministry of Magic official approached. He pulled an identification card from his pocket and waved it gently in the air. The man's voice was as gentle as possible, as if afraid of startling the young suspect. "Hello, my name is Amos Diggory, and I work in the Department of Magical Creature Control." "Hello, my name is Scamander." "Ralph Scamander," the boy nodded politely, asking with a slightly confused tone, "Mr. Diggory, what can I do for you?" Diggory sized Ralph up and down, then said in a deep voice, "According to Section 73 of the Law of Secrecy, all wizards traveling internationally are subject to routine checks. Please cooperate." Ralph gripped the small black leather suitcase tightly in his right hand, seemingly nervous, but he still smiled brightly, revealing a set of white teeth, appearing harmless. "Of course, no problem." The boy took his passport out of his pocket and handed it to Diggory. The instant his pupils dilated, his heart nearly stopped. The lock on the black suitcase suddenly sprang open, and a soft tentacle peeked out from the gap. Luckily, it was a mimicking octopus. The tentacle clung to the suitcase like a black strip of cloth, and Diggory didn't notice anything amiss. Ralph slowly tucked the tentacle back into the suitcase, calmly locking it as if nothing had happened. Diggory checked the passport, handed it back to Ralph, and after a moment's thought, asked, "So, Mr. Scamander, what is the purpose of your return home? Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry starts today." Ralph tried to remain calm. He said softly, "I'm a first-year student, probably." He silently added in his mind. Ralph was indeed a first-year student, but he hadn't received an acceptance letter from Hogwarts. Diggory narrowed his grayish-yellow eyes, scrutinizing Ralph, seemingly trying to glean something from his face. But the boy, head tilted back, smiled slightly, his eyes clear like a spring. "You've been in the Romanian Dragon Sanctuary this summer. I also went to the Albanian forests," Ralph quickly added, "with my grandfather." "The Albanian forests, yes, many magical creatures died mysteriously there. Rumor has it that vampires or the Chupacabra were responsible." Ralph shrugged. "The Albanian Ministry of Magic invited my grandfather to investigate. He's an expert in that area." Diggory hummed in agreement, asking no further questions. He clearly wasn't concerned with the little incident in distant Albania. His attention was entirely focused on the boy. More accurately, the box in Scamander's hand. According to the Ministry of Magic's dusty records, it likely contained countless dangerous magical creatures, enough to destroy all of London. Danger level, 5 stars. Ralph's expression was calm, but his inner state was far from relaxed. He looked exactly like a criminal being pulled over by traffic police for a DUI check, the key point being that he had actually drunk, and even binge drunk. Diggory glanced at the suitcase in Ralph's hand, stroked his reddish-brown beard, and said slowly, "Mr. Scamander, you didn't bring any contraband, did you?" Ralph unconsciously rubbed his thumb and forefinger holding the suitcase, looking blind as he said, "Like what? Dragons from the Romanian protected area, or maybe Vampires from the Albanian forest, Mr. Diggory, I'm only 11 years old, how could I possibly carry such things around? You're so funny. Ralph blinked his blue eyes, revealing a perfectly timed look of grievance, which, combined with his innocent appearance, made him even more pitiful. Smuggling dragons and vampires was no small crime. If it were confirmed, he wouldn't need to go to Hogwarts, he could just book a one-way ticket to Azkaban, to continue his advanced studies there. The accompanying female Ministry of Magic official was also subtly dissatisfied, feeling that her superior wasn't quite right in the head. How could a smuggler be so good-looking? Cough cough, she meant a smuggler, how could he have such innocent eyes? Seeing Ralph's innocent and bewildered expression, the witch was instantly overcome with maternal instincts, feeling a pang of tenderness and wanting to pull him into her arms and shower him with affection. He's really good-looking. Diggory remained unmoved, continuing his relentless questioning. What's in the box? Nothing much, daily necessities. Can I open it? Sorry, that involves my personal privacy. You have no right. I mean, since it's the Ministry of Magic requesting an inspection, of course you can. Seeing Diggory touch his wand at his waist, Ralph quickly changed the subject and handed over the box. But the instant he handed it over, he secretly pressed a button on the box. Diggory took the suitcase, immediately unlocked it, and lifted the lid. Inside were clothes, a notebook, a map, an alarm clock, a watch. He checked it repeatedly, and had the men in black behind him cast various detection spells, but all to no avail. They found no hidden layer of the unseen stretching charm, nor the legendary dangerous magical creatures. Diggory grumbled, somewhat disappointed, as if the bright future of promotion and a raise had slipped away. Sorry, Mr. Scamander, everything is in order. Welcome back to London, have a pleasant sorting. Ralph breathed a sigh of relief. He took the small black leather suitcase, thanked them cheerfully, waved, and smiled, then goodbye, Mr. Diggory, and everyone at the Ministry of Magic. He quickened his pace, his previously heavy steps finally becoming light. Fortunately, he had the suitcase magically reinforced beforehand, preventing any magical detection. Otherwise, he had just gotten off the train and was already in Azkaban. With a hint of relief, Ralph, carrying his small black suitcase, strode towards platform 9. When he was only a dozen meters away, he stopped again. Not far away, a brown-haired girl stood alone in front of a wall, her bags and suitcases neatly arranged beside her, perfectly blocking the platform entrance. The girl crossed her arms, tilted her head back, stared blankly for a moment, then carefully pulled out a wand, waved it in the air, and muttered a spell. Alohomora? But there was no response. The girl immediately began chanting other spells rapidly, but none had any effect. She angrily scratched her hair, making her already frizzy curls even more disheveled, like a vault recently ransacked by a niffler. A voice suddenly rang out. Are you putting on an impromptu performance? The brown-haired girl paused, turning to look at the voice. It was a smiling boy, handsome beyond compare. He carried a small black leather suitcase, his expressive blue eyes scrutinizing her with interest. The girl hesitated, then tentatively asked, Are you a wizard too? Yes, a freshman this year. Ralph straightened his clothes, a bright smile spreading across his face, and slowly walked towards the girl. He needed to make a good impression on his new classmate. Are you performing a wand dance? I haven't been back to England in a long time. Is this a new trend in the wizarding world? It's quite interesting. The brown-haired girl's face flushed instantly. I'm casting a spell, searching for the entrance to platform 9. Sorry, I thought you were performing street art. Ralph quickly apologized. The girl glared at him angrily. Her spell-casting movements were flawless. Flawless. So, have you found the entrance? Ralph asked again. The girl hesitated, then raised her fair chin and nodded slightly, more or less. Ralph glanced at her suspiciously. You've been gesturing with your wand for ages, like you're directing traffic. Are you sure you've found the entrance? Give me a little more time, I'll find it right away. The girl seemed very confident. She stretched her neck, lowered her voice, and said mysteriously, I'll tell you, according to my deduction, the entrance to platform 9 has been deliberately hidden by the school. To get in, you have to pass a series of tests. Ralph paused for 2 seconds, looking at the girl's confident expression, which made him a little unsure. Had he remembered wrong? Wasn't it just passing through this wall to enter platform 9? Why would the school do that? Ralph raised his eyebrows. Of course, it's to test the new students and then sort them into houses based on their performance. You know what sorting is, right? The brown-haired girl said with a serious expression. I read about it in Hogwarts, a history, that every new student has to be sorted. Being able to use magic to find the entrance to Platform 9 probably means you've done well and can be sorted into the best house. Seeing the boy's skeptical look, the girl raised an eyebrow, confidently saying, Don't doubt me, I just used magic to demonstrate my studies during the summer. I tried some simple spells at home, just for practice, and I succeeded. She raised her chin, as proud as a white goose, and rattled off a string of words, seemingly eager to prove that she wasn't some ridiculous fool performing a one dance, but rather an excellent new student who understood the school's intentions and was trying to pass the test. After listening to the girl's animated imagination, Rove said meaningfully, Aren't you overthinking things? Overthinking what? The girl pouted. I bought tons of magic books during the holidays, and I've memorized all my textbooks. Wow, you're amazing. Rove nodded slightly. But what does that have to do with the platform entrance? The brown-haired girl pursed her lips, puffed out her cheeks, and clenched her fists. That irritating tone made her want to punch him. Seeing her anger, Rove quickly said, I think I've found the entrance. The girl looked incredulous. Really, miss? We'll bet you a galleon if you don't believe me. Rove, carrying his black suitcase, stepped over the girl's luggage and walked towards the wall. Under her gaze, he passed straight through it. The brown-haired girl's eyes widened, her face filled with disbelief. The last time she had that expression was when she received an acceptance letter delivered by an owl. A moment later, Rove passed through the wall again, only his head showing. You lost. 1 galleon, he grinned. Oh, right, I forgot to ask, young lady, what's your name? The girl's expression froze for a moment before she whispered, Hermione Granger. The boy carrying the black suitcase paused, then narrowed his azure eyes, his smile widening. Hello, my name is Ralph Scamander. Ralph extended a hand, gently holding it up in front of the girl. Nice to meet you. Welcome to the magical world. Hermione also extended a hand, gently shaking it. Suddenly, a ding sounded in Ralph's mind, a young house witch detected. Side quest 1 triggered, capture Hermione Granger. Reward, enviable her volume, sparing you the terrible curse of middle-aged baldness in British men. Side quest 2, complete 100% taming of Hermione Granger. Reward, superb memory talent, quest incomplete. Chapter 2 Isn't this better than her stick? Ralph Scamander was actually a time traveler. A year ago, he was a typical 5 to 9 office worker in Edinburgh, his money in an Amsterdam bank, having bought an unfinished building by Hengte, and working in education and training. After a car accident, he woke up to find himself transported to a magical world, becoming a teenager. It took him a long time to accept this reality and figure out his new body's identity. Ralph Scamander's grandfather was Newt Scamander, a renowned magizoologist and a recipient of the Order of Merlin, 2nd class. His grandmother was Tina Scamander, a former Auror who captured the first Dark Lord, Grindelwald. His father was a renowned magical naturalist. His mother was a professor at Ilvermorny School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. His family background wasn't exactly ordinary, but it was utterly unremarkable. Coming from an ordinary family was clearly unsafe in this dangerous magical world, especially with Voldemort's impending return. Fortunately, Ralph was a bit overpowered, carrying a system with him, Magical Creature-Taming Encyclopedia. By capturing and taming magical creatures, Ralph could acquire the special magic of those creatures. The system would also periodically issue many random side quests, varying greatly in difficulty. Sometimes it was healing injured animals, sometimes it was nursing magical creature cubs, acting as a male mother, and sometimes it was saving endangered species, helping them breed offspring, commonly known as artificial frightening. In short, the quests were bizarre and varied. So, Ralph wasn't too surprised when he received a quest to capture and tame Hermione Granger. After all, this system didn't usually issue anything substantial. He'd get used to it. Ralph muttered to himself, secretly opening the system, where a light screen appeared that others couldn't see. Host, Ralph Scamander. Gender, male. Birthday, July 15, 1980. Tamed, Botricle, Witchbird, Salamander. Acquired magic, vine growth. Botricle, uses magic to grow plants and possesses the ability to control them. High-pitched cry. Witchbird, emits a sharp cry, with a certain probability of causing dizziness and fear. Salamander, creates a ball of flame. When violently impacted, the flame becomes unstable and prone to explosion. Taming magical creatures is no easy task. This is the result of Ralph's efforts over the past 6 months. Passing through the wall, a deep red steam locomotive stopped in front of platform 9. The sign on the train read, Hogwarts Express, 11 a.m. The rain intensified, and Ralph opened an umbrella. Seeing the girl dragging a large suitcase and carrying a bundle, he gently shielded them from the rain. The raindrops pattered against the umbrella. Hermione struggled to drag her luggage, her ears and neck burning red from the intense analysis she'd just delivered. She was so embarrassed she could have dug a platform 9 with her toes. She turned to the boy, hesitated for a moment, and finally asked, "Didn't you already know that wall could be passed through?" "No, I only just discovered it myself." "It might require some talent," Ralph chuckled. "Hey, can't you see? That's it, you might get assigned to the worst house." Hermione puffed out her cheeks, glared at the boy, and huffed. "You're lying." Ralph smiled, his eyes narrowing, his gaze falling on her remarkably prominent front teeth. "So white, so big." Hermione quickly pursed her lips, hiding her teeth. Her face flushed, her eyes wide, glaring at the boy. This time, she really wanted to punch him. Ralph's smile faded. He stopped teasing the flustered little cat, freeing one hand to help her lift the heavy luggage, then glanced at the gloomy sky. "Let's go find an empty carriage, to catch up on some sleep." The two arrived early, there weren't many students, and they quickly found an empty carriage. Ralph only had a black suitcase, but Hermione carried many bags and packages. It was unclear if she'd brought her entire family. After placing his luggage on the rack, he took out an eye mask from his black suitcase, leaned against the cushion, closed his eyes, and fell into deep sleep. Returning to England from Romania, he'd taken an overnight train journey, but he dared not truly fall asleep at night. With so many people and all sorts of wizards around, losing his black suitcase would be no joke. Not only would he be expelled from Hogwarts, but it would likely cause an international incident. The Hogwarts Express was different, everyone was a student, so it would be easier to find it if lost. Hermione was enthusiastically observing the scene outside the window, about to ask something, when she turned her head and found Ralph already asleep. Hermione stood up, carefully examining the boy's delicate face. Was he really asleep? She let out a long sigh, sat back down on the bench, pursed her lips, and sighed again. Strange classmates, a magic school whose name doesn't sound very respectable. The girl gazed wistfully at the growing rain outside the window, the heavy raindrops pattering against a train. If it weren't for that owl, she might have gone to St. Paul's Girls' School for middle school, and then become a British civil servant, a peaceful life. But the girl's expression quickly brightened again. "Hello, magical world, here I come." After an unknown amount of time, Ralph was awakened by the noise. He subconsciously wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and asked groggily, "Have we arrived at school?" The noise grew louder, a mixture of sobs, screams, and heart-wrenching cries. He removed his blindfold, turned his head, and stared wide-eyed. He saw 3 boys wrestling in the carriage, or more accurately, 2 short, chubby boys and a round-faced boy fighting. The round-faced boy was clearly outnumbered and outgunned, pinned to the ground, unable to move, yet refusing to beg for mercy. Hermione jumped up and down anxiously, shouting, "Stop! Stop it! Don't fight anymore! Stop fighting!" "What's going on?" Ralph asked, bewildered. "Those 2 classmates came in and told us to get out and make room in the carriage." Seeing Ralph awake, Hermione immediately pointed at the 2 short, chubby boys and complained. They even insulted Longbottom's parents, and then they started fighting. Ralph nodded slightly, about to stop the farce, when he caught a glimpse of a strange young girl sitting in the carriage. She wore a white shirt, faded jeans, and canvas shoes, extremely simple clothing. She also had a burgundy ponytail and was looking down, searching for something in her bag. The girl with the ponytail quickly looked up, revealing a thin but incredibly delicate oval face, soft and aloof, very beautiful. The art style was beautiful, the only incongruous thing was that she was carrying a thick, huge baseball bat. Hermione hesitated whether to inform the older students. But the girl with the ponytail was already carrying that worn-out baseball bat, walking towards the 2 short, chubby boys. She raised the bat and swung it down sharply, her wrist suddenly gripped tightly by a hand. The girl with the ponytail turned her head, tilting it slightly, seemingly puzzled. Ralph released her wrist, saying helplessly, "If you hit them with that, you'll be expelled from Azkaban, if not sent there." We are the future flowers of Hogwarts, the rising sun, we must persuade with reason." He pulled a few seeds from his pocket. The girl with the ponytail frowned. At this hour, she had the leisure to eat sunflower seeds? Ralph flicked his wrist, scattering several seeds, and whispered, "The tree world descends. Oops, I mean, vines grow." She almost wandered into the wrong movie set. The seeds hovered in the air, then suddenly dispersed, miraculously taking root and sprouting into countless vines in a kind of time fast-forward manner. Immediately afterward, the vines shot like arrows, coiling around the three wrestling figures. As agile as snakes, they accurately and swiftly bound the two short, stout men tightly, finally dangling them upside down from the car roof. Neville lay on the ground, his large, round face filled with shock. Hermione's mouth gaped open, revealing her signature pair of large front teeth. The girl with the ponytail stood frozen, then looked down at the wooden stick in her hand. Suddenly, she smiled, her clear, beautiful eyes crinkling like crescent moons. "Isn't this better than a stick?" After 3 months, YA has successfully graduated. At the time, there were so many things to do, the thesis and defense were overwhelming, which ultimately led to the cancellation of the previous book. "I'm very sorry. Let me just say this in the bathroom: new book release, new story, please give YA another chance. Thank you all for your support." Chapter 3 Scamander knows nothing about fantastic beasts. Ralph, wand in hand, directed the vines to sway wildly like a musician. As guardians of plants, botricles possess the racial ability to consume magic to accelerate and control plant growth. Ralph had completely tamed a botricle and could also use this magic called vine growth. The two short, chubby boys were tightly bound by the vines, swinging in mid-air like the Calabash brothers, shouting and laughing like 8-year-olds. In their excitement, under Ralph's gentle but profound persuasion, they deeply repented, crying their hearts out, repeatedly apologizing and begging for forgiveness. Ralph nodded in satisfaction. Good children admit their mistakes and correct them. He snapped his fingers, and the two chubby boys, suspended in mid-air by the vines, were thrown out of the carriage. Hermione stared in disbelief, then after a long pause, said speechlessly, "You call this persuading people with reason?" "Yeah," Ralph said, clutching the back of his head, a gentle breeze brushing his face. He smiled slightly, "But there's another half to the sentence." "What?" "I'll kill you if you disagree." The round-faced boy stood up, his legs a little weak. He swallowed hard and whispered, "Goyle and Crabbe are just Malfoy's lackeys. They'll definitely go after Malfoy, and then come back for revenge. Don't be afraid. The more you fear these lowlifes, the more trouble they'll cause you. Besides, even if Malfoy really comes, I'll still be there," Ralph said nonchalantly, patting the boy's shoulder. "I'll reason with him, persuade him with reason." Hermione rolled her eyes. The round-faced boy, however, was deeply moved, wishing he could immediately acknowledge Ralph as his older brother. "My name is Ralph Scamander, and yours?" the round-faced boy stammered. Neville Longbottom, the Gryffindor Sword Saint?" Ralph raised his eyebrows, scrutinizing Neville carefully, but was somewhat disappointed. Clearly, Neville wasn't yet the Sword Saint who dared to face Voldemort head-on. He was now a somewhat timid, round-faced chubby boy. Ralph looked at the girl with a burgundy ponytail, who casually held a baseball bat and said softly, "Shirley Swinton." Seeing Ralph staring at the bat, Shirley said calmly, "I like playing baseball, so it's reasonable for me to carry a baseball bat, isn't it? Go ahead and carry it." "Perfect for self-defense," Ralph said casually. "Hogwarts is dangerous, people die every year." Hermione gasped in shock, flustered. Die? Every year?" "Yeah, last year there was a defense against the dark arts professor who fell off his flying broomstick." Ralph's lips curled slightly as he deliberately lowered his voice. His brains looked like jelly splattered everywhere, his eyeballs bounced on the ground, and he was eventually eaten by Hagrid's dog. "And the year before, a professor was fishing by the Black Lake and was dragged into the lake by a water monkey and drowned." Hermione stood there, mouth agape, eyes glazed over. Even the usually aloof Shirley gripped her wooden stick tightly, her expression unchanged but her movement slightly stiff. Ralph suppressed a laugh, no longer trying to frighten the two blank-minded girls. He sat down in a chair and looked out the window. The heavy rain had subsided, and Platform 9, after the rain, had a soft outline, shrouded in mist. Thick smoke from the steam locomotive swirled above the bustling crowds. The air filled with the noise of dragging luggage and the cheerful laughter of wizards. The atmosphere inside the carriage was somewhat heavy. Neville was still trembling with fear, worried that Malfoy would bring a group of people to cause trouble. Hermione pulled out a copy of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, but her gaze wasn't on it. The girl's eyes were unfocused, absent-minded, wondering if she should just go home. At least it would be safer. Shirley, with her ponytail, clutched her wooden stick, staring blankly out the window. Basking in the warm sunshine, Rove was engrossed in reading Postpartum Care of the Warthog when a toad suddenly hopped onto his lap. The toad stared wide-eyed at his black leather briefcase. A magical, entirely emerald green creature, resembling both a stick insect and a plant, emerged from the briefcase. Its head poked out, its body only a hand's length long, its tiny brown eyes blinking incessantly. Stared at intently by the toad, the botricle, which had been trying to climb upwards, froze instantly. The toad flicked its tongue, startling the botricle, which immediately began to climb with agile movements. Its front claws hooked onto the button of Rove's coat, and it darted to his waist, finally leaping to hang it under his sleeve, swaying slightly. Rove's right wrist snapped shut, and two fingers grasped the botricle, gently holding it in his palm. The botricle affectionately nuzzled his fingers. "Raffer," Neville exclaimed in a panic, "what are you doing? It's probably hungry." Ralph pulled a few freeze-dried nuts from his pocket. Sherry and Hermione were both shocked, staring at the botricle. This was a creature they had never seen before. Hermione jumped up excitedly, almost bumping into the luggage rack. "Botricle. I've read about it in books." The girl gazed at the botricle bathed in sunlight, waving her copy of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them excitedly. "The book says that botricles are gentle magical creatures that become guardians of the trees they inhabit, and the wood of those trees is usually suitable for making wands." Hermione displayed her extraordinary memory. She could recite the contents word for word without even opening the book. Even though the magical creatures protection class wasn't offered until the 3rd year. "Ralph, what did you feed Raffer?" Neville asked curiously. He had previously fed Raffer mosquitoes, but Raffer had ignored them. "Freeze-dried fruit made from Hogwarts," Ralph said, squeezing a freeze-dried fruit. "Chicken flavor, crunchy, 6 times more nutritious than beef. Want to try some?" Neville quickly shook his head. Hermione, finally finding an opportunity to show off, wasn't about to let it slip by. She crossed her arms, raised her head high, and said, "Hogwarts is a kind of pest that looks like a mushroom. The book says it can only be used as food." Ralph shook his head, correcting her. "Actually, the sap secreted by Hogwarts can also be used to make healing potions and herbicides." "Impossible. Where did you see that?" "It's not mentioned in the book," Hermione protested. "Textbooks aren't always entirely correct. This part is wrong. The revised edition of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them will be corrected," Ralph said with a slight smile. "Don't be so rigid in your reading, it's not good." Hermione, however, didn't believe him. She put down her book, glared at Ralph, and exclaimed, "You know more than Mr. Newt Scamander." "Newt Scamander is just a retired old man. He knows nothing about Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them," Ralph said with a strange, ambiguous smile. Hermione was indignant, as if Ralph had insulted her idol. The girl glanced at the boy sideways, her little face clearly saying, "Who do you think you are?" Ralph looked at the stubborn girl in front of him, grinning. "Oh, right, I forgot to tell you. Newt Scamander is my grandfather. A few months ago, we discovered a new use for Hogwarts secretions." Hermione then remembered that this man was also named Scamander. "Ah, how embarrassing." She immediately deflated, pulled out a pen from somewhere, bit off the cap, and scribbled fiercely in the book. Shirley watched this, resting her chin on her hand, and smiled gently. Ralph stroked the toad, Leif, who was frantically eating on his lap, when suddenly a ding sounded in his brain. Detected one heirloom toad, Leif. Side quest triggered, treat Leif's ADHD. Reward, magic, giant tongue whip, enhances control over the tongue, allowing free extension and expansion. Deals magical damage to creatures licked. The violent vibration has a certain probability of causing dizziness and disorientation. Note, the probability increases by 20% when used on female magical creatures. Ralph was stunned. This absurd magic. He licked his lips and suddenly grinned at Neville. "Look at this toad, it seems to have heatstroke. How about we, he." Chapter 4 Miss Granger, you don't want everyone to know, do you? Since ancient times, wizards who can be called magizoologists have always been excellent veterinarians. Just like physicists must have a wealth of mathematical knowledge, The old man telling fortunes on the street must be a master at applying screen protectors. The bathhouse attendant can also perform cupping. The original owner of Ralph's body, while not quite a magizoologist, was born into such a family, with ancestors who dealt with magical creatures, so naturally he was influenced by his family's knowledge. He inherited these memories when he transmigrated. Therefore, Ralph is indeed a veterinarian and can treat Raffer's ADHD. But Raffer doesn't think he's sick, especially when he hears about surgery. He's so frightened that he quickly falls backward, his paws wobbling, rolling his eyes, and sticking out his tongue to play dead. He's just really greedy, occasionally sticking out his tongue to pick up a freeze-dried food, his mouth slightly bulging, and secretly swallowing it. Seeing this comical scene, Sherry couldn't help but laugh. Hermione rolled her eyes, seemingly quite disgusted by this unyielding gluttony. Even Neville, his owner, couldn't bear to look. It was truly embarrassing. Just then, a sharp whistle sounded, and the Hogwarts Express shuddered, making a creaking sound, as it slowly pulled out of platform 9. Ralph turned to look out a window. The Thames flowed calmly in the distance, shrouded in a light mist. The towering Tower Bridge, against a backdrop of the sky, resembled the two masts of a ship, quickly disappearing into the rushing water. The boy clutched the back of his head, looking up at the clear sky after the rain, as if coated with a beautiful glaze. The group admired the scenery for a while, but Malfoy didn't cause any trouble. Instead, they were greeted by a hawker witch. She pushed a car full of food, opened the compartment door, and asked with a friendly smile, "Children, would you like to buy some food? The train won't stop at any stations along the way. It won't arrive at Hogwarts until very late." Neville stood up, but after checking his pockets, he quickly sat back down. Facing everyone's gaze, his face flushed red, and he awkwardly explained, I didn't bring any money. My grandma was afraid I'd lose my wallet, so she didn't give me any pocket money." "Then how are you going to eat?" Hermione asked curiously. "Grandma told me this morning that she'd have an owl bring lunch." Neville sighed. He only had a pitiful one knuckle on him. Wait a minute, damn it, where's the bronze knuckle he secretly hid in his pocket? Watching Neville frantically rummaging through his pockets, Ralph and the others exchanged glances. Mrs. Longbottom really knows how to judge people. "It's all right, Neville, just buy some snacks to tide you over. You don't need to pay." Ralph smiled at the three of them. "Pick whatever you like, don't be shy with me." The boy waved his hand, as if announcing generously, he'd pay today. Hermione's mood instantly brightened. She cheerfully dropped her pen and book and skipped towards the witch's cart. Since meeting Ralph, she had suffered several setbacks and hadn't managed to regain her composure. Since he was being so generous in treating everyone, she wouldn't be so ruthless. Hermione, her little scheme in mind, picked through the cart, grabbing a huge pile of snacks. After finishing, she gave Sherry a meaningful look, urging her not to be shy and to fleece Ralph. Sherry didn't get up, her long ponytail swayed slightly as she softly said, "No need, I brought my own food." Ralph had also picked out quite a few snacks. Glancing at Hermione whispering with Sherry out of the corner of his eye, he almost burst out laughing. Suppressing his laughter, he asked, "All chosen? Want some more?" I'd be so sorry." Seeing Ralph's politeness, Hermione felt genuinely embarrassed, but her hands didn't hesitate, and she was forced to choose some pastries for Sherry. Satisfied, she sat down and eagerly unwrapped a pumpkin pie. Ralph, clutching a pile of snacks, tilted his head and looked at Hermione, saying, "Got your stuff? Pay up, what are you waiting for?" The girl, who had already wolfed down half a pumpkin pie, was completely bewildered. We made a bet before, whether I could find the entrance to platform 9, the stake was 1 galleon, and you've already forgotten." Ralph, with half of an L1 dangling from his mouth, wore a shocked and irritating expression. No way, you're not going to renege on your bet, are you? That's so unsportsmanlike." Hermione almost choked on her pie, glaring at him angrily. "Rend on my foot, then pay up." Ralph sat on the bench, crossed his legs, and winked at her, as if to say, "Miss Granger, you don't want everyone to know about your embarrassing moment outside the platform, do you?" This undoubtedly hit Hermione's weak spot, and she was the first to give in, biting her lip and saying, "You're ruthless." Neville was dumbfounded. Granger, who seemed rather unapproachable, was actually so obedient to Ralph, paying the bill just like that. No wonder he's the boss I've chosen. Hermione quickly pulled a galleon from her pocket, and the sales witch happily gave her 7 copper knuckles in change. Thank you for your patronage. They bought so much food and didn't even have a galleon. The wizarding world truly offered good value for money. Keep in mind, at the exchange rate, a galleon was only about 5 pounds. Sherry was struggling with her food. The girl wasn't lying. She had indeed brought lunch, but it was really just a few pitiful slices of bread in a clean bamboo food box. The bread was so hard that she had to gulp down a mouthful of water before she could swallow it with difficulty. When she looked up, she found a handsome young man staring at her. Sherry was unusually embarrassed. After a slight hesitation, she raised the bread in her hand and smiled. "Want some?" Ralph, without any hesitation, picked up a piece of bread from the bamboo food box, chewed it slowly, and then placed a pile of snacks on the ponytail girl's faded jeans. Sherry hurriedly took the food, about to refuse, when Hermione shared half of her snacks with her. She huffed, "Don't be shy. If you don't eat, someone will eat it all." "Don't let him have it," Hermione said, glaring at Ralph, who was slowly unpacking the chocolate frog. It was all her money. Sherry was a little flustered, but couldn't refuse any more, because her lunch had been divided up by Ralph and Hermione. Ignoring Hermione's fierce glare, Ralph glanced at his watch and asked, "And you, Neville? It's already 12:30. Your grandma didn't forget to bring you lunch, did she?" Neville craned his neck, peering out the window, hoping to see an owl delivering takeout, but he didn't even see a feather. He mumbled something, then scratched his head and said, "It's quite possible. She said she'd bring me lunch when she went to the Dumbledore Society last time, but she forgot." "The Dumbledore Society?" Hermione exclaimed. "What's that?" Sherry, biting into a sparkly pink coconut sorbet, also perked up her ears curiously. "A society made up of old witches with an average age of 75, Ralph explained. "They're all die-hard fans of Professor Dumbledore. My great-aunt Queenie is the president of the American chapter. She's 90 years old. Here, Neville, have a chocolate frog," Ralph said with a grin, handing him some more snacks. "It's their treat anyway, might as well eat it." Hermione's face stiffened as she took a big bite of the bread Sherry had brought, but she clearly underestimated its hardness, digging into two of her front teeth and nearly bringing tears to her eyes. Someone let out a soft laugh, and the girl immediately looked up, giving him a death stare, especially at Ralph, as if she'd smash his head in if he dared to laugh. Ralph pinched his thigh, desperately trying to suppress his laughter. He couldn't laugh. If he laughed now, he was dead. He was a professional. No matter how funny it was, he wouldn't laugh, probably. Chapter 5 Salamander. Under Hermione's death stare, the entire carriage fell silent. Even Raffer held his breath, quietly nestled against Neville's lap, afraid to steal any more freeze-dried treats for fear of angering the somewhat volatile witch. "It's all right, you can laugh all you want. I'm not angry." Hermione's voice suddenly softened, her lips curving into a sweet smile, though her crescent-shaped eyes held no real joy. Witches were magical creatures, and their words, especially in such a cunning form, couldn't be taken seriously. But Neville, oblivious to the wickedness of human nature and the decline of morality, actually laughed foolishly. Ralph sighed softly, Sherry gently rubbed her forehead, and even Raffer looked at his mistress as if she were an idiot. Hermione's expression changed swiftly, leaping to her feet and unleashing a flurry of Madman Wand techniques with her wand, striking Neville repeatedly in pain. He had to use Raffer as a shield against his round head to absorb the damage. "Ralph, quack quack." Ralph was horrified. A little witch this age was definitely not to be trifled with. This system wanted him to capture, train, and tame her. Tame my ass. The boy was secretly relieved he hadn't laughed, but then Hermione turned and stared at him, saying, "Even though you're not laughing, I know you're definitely laughing at me, you little brat. Are you really ignoring the facts?" Seeing Hermione rushing towards him, Ralph pressed down on her smooth forehead, letting the girl thrash her arms and legs. He sighed and said, "Hermione, I really didn't laugh at you, don't overthink it." "Neville. How could you laugh at Hermione? She just bumped two front teeth. What are you gloating about? I'm not criticizing you, but we're classmates, don't you have any sympathy?" "Neville, I'll fight you." Hermione was furious and embarrassed. She was probably like a puppy, opening her mouth to bite, but Ralph immediately pulled his hand back, causing her to miss. Without an arm to support her, the girl leaned too far forward, stumbled, and fell heavily into Ralph's arms. Ralph quickly raised his French salute, innocently shouting, trying to scam me. I didn't even touch her." "Everyone's watching." Hermione's face flushed red. She jumped up, panting as she smoothed her messy hair, glared at Ralph menacingly, and then sat back down. Sherry lowered her head slightly, her eyelashes trembling. She said softly, "It's all my fault. I didn't warn you that the bread was hard." She grew up in a remote monastery and had left 2 days early to catch the train. While the bread wouldn't spoil, it would harden easily if left out for too long. "It's all right." Hermione smiled warmly and waved her hand generously. "I've eaten French baguettes before, and they're even harder than this." "I heard they use baguettes as weapons during parades." Ralph glanced at Hermione in surprise. Although the girl was feisty, she was very considerate of others' feelings. After their initial bickering, the four of them enthusiastically threw themselves into the great undertaking of making rice, while also collecting chocolate frog cards. Ralph casually opened a chocolate frog card, picked it up, and saw an old wizard holding a strangely shaped wand that suddenly emitted a large burst of green light before bursting into laughter. He flipped it over. The card contained the wizard's biography, Goldrouth. The most dangerous dark wizard of the Middle Ages, considered a hateful figure, he wrote a most poisonous magic, advancing the study of dark magic. Goldrouth used his son, Hereward, for magical research, ultimately being imprisoned in the cellar by his son, Hereward, and died a gruesome death there. What a loving father and son. Ralph glanced at the biography and tossed a card to the energetic Hermione and Sherry. Ralph had little interest in collecting chocolate frog cards. Neville, from a wizarding family, had been collecting for years and had no shortage of cards. The two girls were very enthusiastic, especially Shirley, who had heard that sets of picture cards could be sold for money. Happy times always seem fleeting, as if a magical force were silently drawing time away. The fields rushing past a train window grew increasingly desolate, and with the disappearance of farmland came vast forests, winding rivers, and dark green hills. The carriage gradually quieted down. Shirley rested her chin on her hands, gazing at the distant scenery. Her long ponytail draped over her shoulders and hung in front of her, swaying gently in the wind. Hermione, on the other hand, snatched a travelogue from Ralph, describing the dragon sanctuary in Romania. The girl read it intently, sometimes excited, sometimes leaping with joy. Ralph leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, head tilted to one side, continuing to doze off. When his head tilted to a certain angle, the hunchback tree perched on his shoulder would quietly straighten it, then let it tilt again. Just then, a scream suddenly rang out in the carriage. The sudden cry startled the botricle, which trembled and quickly burrowed into Ralph's arms, whimpering pitifully. Hermione, who had just unwrapped a liquor-soaked pudding and taken only 2 bites, was startled and jerked violently, her expression blank for a moment before she burped twice. She seemed to have choked, and quickly puffed out her chest. Sherry, who was instinctively reaching for her baseball bat, immediately slapped Hermione's flat chest hard, catching the girl's breath. Everyone looked at Neville, who cried out, "Ralph, he's gone." After catching her breath, Hermione said irritably, "I thought Goyle and Crabbe had brought trouble again. Could he be hiding in some corner of the carriage?" Sherry suggested. "Probably not. Raffer has escaped from me so many times. Every time I can't find him, he's run away from home," Neville said anxiously. "He probably doesn't like me holding him when I sleep. People pet cats, you pet toads, and you even have to cuddle with him while sleeping. No wonder Raffer ran away." Seeing Neville's great anxiety, Hermione and Sherry helped check the carriage, searching high and low for Raffer. Ralph didn't get up. He whispered to soothe the frightened botricle, then listened intently for a moment. The botricle perched on the boy's shoulder, its arm grasping a strand of blonde hair hanging down his sideburns, whispering softly into his ear. Ralph nodded slightly and looked up, saying, "Don't bother looking anymore. Growth told me that Raffer sneaked out when the door was opened earlier. You can communicate with botricles." Hermione's eyes widened in surprise. "Yes, but only with this botricle," Ralph explained. He could communicate with every fully domesticated animal, but this communication was through the system. Ralph didn't speak the botricle language. Hermione and the others, however, were unaware of this. They looked at Ralph, thinking the boy was incredibly capable, worthy of being Newt Scamander's grandson. The botricle named Groat, under the watchful eyes of so many, pressed its fingers to its cheek, somewhat shyly, and swayed slightly before quickly burrowing into Ralph's collar. Neville looked at Ralph anxiously. "What do we do? The train is so big, where are we going to find Raffer?" "That's easy," Ralph whistled. A moment later, a fiery red lizard darted out of the small black suitcase like lightning, circling happily around the boy. A fire lizard, Hermione exclaimed excitedly. Ralph picked up the fire lizard and placed it on his shoulder. The lizard, radiating heat, stretched out its head and affectionately stroked the boy's cheek. This fire lizard is named Fire Kiss. It can help locate Leif. Ralph pulled a fragrant, bright red pill from his pocket. The fire lizard quickly swallowed it, letting out a joyful cry. "Ralph, what did you feed it?" Shirley asked. "A pill made of chili peppers. Fire lizards are born of fire and feed on fire, they cannot survive without it," Ralph explained. "But if you feed the fire lizard chili peppers regularly, it can escape the fire for short periods. The spicier the pepper, the longer it can escape, but it can't exceed 6 hours." The group seemed thoughtful. In just half a day, they had learned a great deal from Ralph that wasn't in their textbooks. Ralph flicked his beloved pet Scarlet Head with a finger and laughed. "All right, Firekiss, go help find Leif." The fire lizard suddenly opened its mouth wide, revealing gleaming, sharp teeth, and then stuck out its tongue, flicking out a ball of flame. Soon, Firekiss jumped from the boy's shoulder to the windowsill, then to the ground. Its head, like a radar, spun around, glanced at Rove, as if to tell the boy it had found its target, and then dashed away. Chapter 6 Replenishing Mana. A salamander darted out from under the carriage door, and several people followed it towards the exit. However, after only a few carriages, their path was blocked. A group of young wizards crowded the aisle, surrounding a black boy with dreadlocks, their faces showing a mixture of excitement and fear. "Let us see your big treasure again, Lee." "Yeah, Lee. Even a tiny glimpse, just one look, otherwise I won't be able to sleep tonight." "Lee, can I touch your treasure? I've never seen one so big." "Please." Surrounded by everyone, Lee Jordan felt a little smug. He chuckled, "My treasure is shy. You can see it, but please don't touch it, or you'll break it." Lee Jordan gestured for everyone to come closer, then quietly pulled out a box. He opened it, revealing a tuft of sexy black hair, followed by furry, jet black, 8 legs. It was a black bagworm, with small, tightly packed eyes. 2 dark bands outlined its body, converging at the rear to form a point, and its chelicerae were covered in rag-like teeth. The young wizards were all satisfied upon seeing the bagworm. The boys pointed and gestured at each other, expressing their disdain for the little spider. The girls let out sharp screams, displaying their weakness, but their voices betrayed a mix of excitement and fear. Lee closed the box, but many of the young wizards who hadn't seen it clearly urged him to show off his prized possession again, so everyone could admire, enjoy, and play with it. After a few rounds, the young wizards had grown accustomed to the bagworm and were somewhat bored. The cheers subsided considerably. Lee blinked and said, "This one's pretty ordinary. I have some other goodies in my carriage." "Is it an even bigger spider?" "What, a giant spider, even more exciting than a spider." Lee held up the box and shouted, "Come on, you'll see." The little wizard's emotions were stirred up again, and he surrounded Lee, feeling like the coolest kid at Hogwarts. It really did light up. 2 spells suddenly flashed across the aisle, one hitting Lee and making him glow brightly, and the other hitting the bag spider in the box. The scene looked just like the Japanese server's top male gunner bravely fighting the enemy. A noisy shouting sounded in the aisle, but it was definitely not excitement, but fear. The bag spider, which was originally only the size of a palm, swelled to more than half a meter long under the effect of the enlargement spell. The sexy little black hairs on its legs turned into fine, dangerously shiny bristles, and the beautiful patterns looked ferocious and terrifying. No more young wizards dared to try and handle the spider with their bare hands. They screamed and scattered, fleeing into the carriage. Lee's face, swollen like a pig's head by the enlargement charm, also tried to run, but the giant bag spider suddenly leaped up, lunging at his head, its 8 legs gripping his neck, its abdomen pressed against his face. The bag spider opened its mouth, extending its long, needle-like proboscis, and inserted it into Lee's mouth, all the way down his throat. The posture resembled a facehugger's implantation process, or perhaps a nucleic acid test. Ralph stood in the aisle, and suddenly a ding sounded in his mind, detected one domesticated bag spider under the enlargement charm. Side quest triggered, capture the bag spider. Reward, mana replenishment, using lips as a medium and tongue as an absorber. Establish a mana channel to absorb mana from magical creatures, thereby quickly restoring your own mana. Quest incomplete. System, is this mana replenishment thing even serious? Ralph rubbed his face and sighed softly. He was undoubtedly a decent person. Even though he had learned a lot of theoretical knowledge by watching short videos in his previous life, he was still not interested in the liquid exchange mono-replenishment method. But at this moment, in order to save people, he had no choice but to hold his nose and force to complete the evil task issued by the system. Lee was not in mortal danger, but the massive loss of mana made him tremble all over. He sat on the ground with his shoulders slumped and his limbs weak. He had the spider's mouth parts in his mouth and said in a muffled voice, "Hurry, pull it out." The little wizards ollied far away, quietly opening the crack in the carriage door to observe what was happening in the corridor. Seeing that no one was helping, Neville, who was also very scared, mustered up his courage and walked over tremblingly. He hugged the spider and pulled it backward hard. The bag spider was pulled into an amazing arc, but it still refused to let go. Its mouth parts were inserted even tighter, causing Lee's throat to hurt. He tried to bite off the spider's mouth parts, but the thick venom spraying from them made his lips numb, leaving him without the strength to even clench his teeth. "Neville, stop pulling." Ralph walked over and stopped him. "The harder you pull, the tighter the bag spider will pull. This student's mouth might get torn apart." Neville was so frightened that he immediately let go. Lee's face also turned dark, making his sausage lips look even redder. He asked gruffly, "Then, what do we do?" "Bag spiders like dark and damp environments," Ralph said softly. "They are most afraid of fire." Hermione, who had been peeking around, rummaged in her pocket and then turned to the girl with the ponytail, asking, "Shirley, did you bring matches?" "Matches? Are you even a witch, Hermione?" Ralph glanced at her sideways and said with feigned concern, "I'm really worried that you might be placed in the worst house." The girl wrinkled her nose, unusually not retaliating, but just said irritably, "Help him." Ralph didn't take out his wand. He simply raised his right hand, and tiny sparks of fire swirled around the boy's fingertips. He whispered, "Fire lizard." The students watching stared wide-eyed. Many of the younger wizards were just there for the spectacle, but only the older students understood the absurdity of this move. He hadn't used the wand at all, it was wandless casting. The ball of flame gathered, floated into the air, and suddenly grew countless times larger. When it was fully formed, it was in the shape of a lizard, its body wreathed in flames. The bag spider instinctively dodged the scorching flames, releasing its grip on Lee. It fell to the ground and swiftly dashed away, trying to escape. "Firecus!" Ralph shouted, simultaneously bending his fingers and gently tapping, flicking out several seeds. The fire lizard that had been perched on the boy's shoulder, upon hearing the command, pounced, blocking the bag spider's path and confronting it. The seeds landed on the bag spider's head, and under the influence of magic, they grew rapidly, soon becoming several long snakes that unfurled in the air, instantly binding the bag spider tightly. As the system notification sounded, "Side quest complete," Ralph smiled contentedly, "Capture complete, thanks to the generous donors and for their 10,000 coin donations." Also thanking, and for their donations. As is customary, a bonus chapter is awarded for every 10,000 coin donation. However, the editor doesn't recommend updating a large number of chapters during the new book's release period, as too many words will overwhelm the recommendations. Therefore, any accumulated unpaid chapters will be added upon the book's release. There are still drafts in reserve, so don't worry about me not paying my debts. Thank you all for your support. Chapter 7. You'll be expelled from Hogwarts sooner or later. Ralph, holding the bag spider bound hand and foot, stroked its head. The bag spider, feeling insulted, struggled, its small eyes flashing with angry glints. "Wow, this little thing's pretty fierce," but the more it struggled, the more excited Ralph became. He couldn't wait to experience what it was like to replenish mana. Of course, Ralph wouldn't miss such a good opportunity to advertise. He turned to the students hiding in the carriage, his face beaming, and said, "Dear students, if your pets are sick, feel free to come to me. I specialize in treating all kinds of difficult cases, and the fees are very low. I'm a professional. For the system, not every magical creature encountered would trigger a quest." After much trial and error, Ralph discovered that animals with owners had a much higher trigger rate. For example, encountering 100 wild toads might not even trigger a single quest, but encountering Leif immediately triggered a quest to treat ADHD. Because Leif had an owner. In the system's view, capturing wild animals was nothing compared to luring someone else's magical creature. Your own flowers smell sweet, wildflowers by the roadside smell sweet, but nothing smells as good as someone else's. Ralph didn't want to be a minotaur, but he was forced into it. So, he decided to open a small veterinary clinic at Hogwarts, specializing in treating wizards' pets, not for money, but just to trigger more quests and earn as many rewards as possible. He even had a name for the clinic in mind, Celia's Magical Animal Shop. Seeing the spider successfully captured, the young wizards grew bolder, emerging from the carriage and clapping enthusiastically. Many witches stared wide-eyed. When did Hogwarts have such high-quality students? This was neither scientific nor magical. Can people come to you for treatment when they're sick? A tall girl with brown curly hair, her almond-shaped eyes lingering on Ralph's handsome face. This kind of high-quality junior was a new tea she'd never tasted before. Many students looked at the beautiful senior, their gazes slightly downwards revealing an undeniable, bulging figure, and many swallowed hard. Ralph glanced at the senior student without revealing his true feelings, his eyes innocent, and smiled. Of course, even the most dangerous illness. I can cure it. No charge if I can't. Newt appeared to be a magizoologist and part-time veterinarian, but he was also a gynecologist. Ralph had learned a few of his most secret skills from the old man. The swaying witches burst into laughter. The tall girl with brown curly hair tossed her large waves and smiled. My name is Penelope Crivard. I'm a Ravenclaw student. I hope you can be assigned to our house. We're all beautiful seniors. Thank you for the suggestion, Senior Penelope. I'll consider it, Ralph said warmly. If you're feeling unwell, be sure to come see me. I'll give you a 50% discount. Hermione, standing nearby, practically grimaced. Ralph had not only cheated her out of a galleon, but also bullied her in the carriage, yet he was incredibly agreeable to a beautiful stranger, even offering her a discount. How infuriating. Neville was even more surprised. Just now in the carriage, Ralph had mentioned having hereditary autism and social anxiety, making Neville want to discuss his condition. Now, he didn't seem like it at all. Lee Jordan looked at Ralph with admiration. He'd been at Hogwarts for years and hadn't spoken to many girls. While this kid had become friends in no time. It was truly enviable. Thanks to you, brother. Ralph Scamander, right? If anyone bothers you at Hogwarts, just say my name. Lee showed off his arm tattoo, looking like a petty scoundrel, but the large tattoo didn't seem waterproof, it was fading from sweat. This made Ralph suspect that the big gold chain around Lee's neck would also float on the surface of the water when he took a bath. Lee, what are you going to do with this bag spider? Ralph asked, picking up the bag spider. Keeping it, Lee gave a wry smile, his face was swollen like that. How could he dare keep a bag spider? Yes, the instantaneous, intense release when the bag spider uses its mouth parts to absorb its own magic is indeed exhilarating, but he's developed a bit of a phobia about it now. I don't want to touch it anymore. Maybe I can release it in the Forbidden Forest, Lee said. Bag spiders are an invasive species and not suitable for the Forbidden Forest, Ralph said. Since you don't want to keep it anymore, keep it with me. I'll find it a good home, okay? Lee put his arm around Ralph's shoulder and said, I have to find the culprit. Someone cast a size-enhancing spell on this bag spider. Do you know who did it? Ralph asked curiously. Besides the Weasley brothers, who else would do such a prank? Lee cursed. They borrowed my bag spider before, wanting to throw it in the Slytherin carriage, but I refused. But it doesn't matter, Lee grinned mischievously. I'm going to bully the twin brother. I heard he's also a freshman this year. His name is Ron Weasley. Lee rolled up his sleeves and ran towards the carriage. There was no excitement to see, and the crowd gradually dispersed. The salamander hopped onto Ralph's shoulder and whispered in his ear. The boy looked towards the bathroom door and asked, Neville, is that your toad? Raffer, Neville shouted excitedly. Thank you, Merlin, thank you, Ralph. He ran over, grabbed Raffer, and hugged him tightly, rubbing his round face vigorously. I finally found you, Raffer, don't leave me again. Raffer let out a pitiful croak, seemingly wanting to escape his clutches. Now that they had found Raffer, the group prepared to return to the carriage. Ralph used vines to make a cage and locked the bag spider inside, but it drooped its head, looking sickly, and ignored Ralph's attempts to amuse it, seemingly still sulking. The boy picked up the cage and shook it for a moment, laughing. I'll find you a good place, you'll like it there. Hermione glanced at Ralph several times, initially not wanting to pay him any attention, but after much restraint, she couldn't help but say, Are you really going to keep this spider? The school definitely won't allow you to keep such a dangerous animal. The school doesn't allow bowtails or salamanders either, Ralph laughed. Besides, I won't keep it in the dorm, and it won't bother anyone. This bag spider isn't dangerous at all. It's as cute as a toad or an owl. The school might find out, and you might get expelled." The girl persisted. "Don't you believe me? As long as you don't report me," Ralph said, looking at the three of them. "The school won't find out." Sherry and Neville both shook their heads, and along with Ralph, all three looked at Hermione. Even Ralph looked at her. Hermione was bewildered. She suddenly glared at him and snorted, "Why are you looking at me? Do you think I'm the kind of person who secretly tattles behind people's backs?" Ralph nodded. "Absolutely." The girl took a deep breath. "You'll be expelled from Hogwarts sooner or later. Thank you for your blessing." The sunlight was a bit dazzling. The boy raised his right hand to shield his forehead, exhaled softly, and said wistfully, "How did you know this is a tradition of our family? If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels." Chapter 8 Why Did You Provoke Him? Being expelled from Hogwarts is indeed one of the few fine traditions that the Scamander family has inherited to this day. Multiple generations of wizards have achieved this, such as Newt Scamander. Ralph could even proudly express disdain for the Defense Against the Dark Arts position, then use Green's Law. Scamander was cursed before you were cursed. Of course, upon closer examination, it has nothing to do with a curse. It's more because Scamander wizards enjoy keeping magical creatures, so being expelled isn't so difficult to understand. Therefore, Ralph's trip to Hogwarts this time was for only three things: graduation, graduation, and more damn graduation. Getting a degree is really important. The Scamander family can't be full of dropouts, can they? As they approached their carriage, Ralph spotted two familiar figures in the distance, furtively guarding the door, looking around as if keeping watch. The two short, stout men were indeed keeping watch. Upon seeing Ralph, Goyle tried his best to whistle to alert the people inside the carriage to come out. Goyle was too nervous and didn't whistle. Luckily, Crabbe wasn't completely stupid and quickly knocked on the wooden door of the compartment. The response was a terrified scream, followed by a deafening, pig-like wail from inside the carriage. For a moment, Goyle and Crabbe were caught in a dilemma. Run away? Malfoy was still inside. If they slipped away like that, they'd be in deep trouble. But opening the door to rescue him? Don't be ridiculous. The screams from inside meant Malfoy was clearly in danger. Going in at this point would likely result in their own demise, if not death. They might be a little slow to react, but they weren't stupid. The two stood frozen at the doorway. Ralph approached step by step, and as he neared the door, he frowned, seemingly impatient, and said, "Get out." The two short, stout men growled, their fists clenched so tightly their knuckles cracked. Who wasn't a lawless young master at home? To be told to get out one day. That dismissive look only fueled their anger and humiliation. They glared at each other, then strode away without looking back. "Fine, get out." Humph. Gore and Crabbe dashed off, disappearing in a few moments. Ralph opened the car door, narrowing his azure eyes as he peered into the carriage. A pale, thin boy was screaming hysterically. A creature, resembling a rat but with an anemone-like arch on its back, clung to his neck. The creature opened its sharp snout and bit down hard on the boy's neck, causing him to fall backward and crash heavily to the ground. "Malfoy!" Neville exclaimed. "What's that rat?" "Matra rat." Ralph expressionlessly tossed out a dried fish. The Matra rat reluctantly released Malfoy, leaped up, opened its mouth, and sucked the dried fish into its mouth, tearing it apart and devouring it in a few bites. Malfoy was curled up on the ground, a bite mark on his pale neck, red and swollen. "I'm going to die," he cried. "Someone save me. I'm going to die." "It's just a bite from a Matra rat. It won't kill you." Ralph slowly walked into the carriage and examined it. "Then why am I gagging?" Feeling nauseous, Malfoy covered his mouth, gagging until tears streamed down his face. "You won't die, but that doesn't mean you won't get sick." Ralph turned to the terrified brown-haired girl, raising his chin and saying, "Hermione, explain to him what the symptoms of a Matra rat bite are." Hermione hesitated for a moment, then said, "People bitten by Matra rats will gag, and in severe cases, they'll even emit sparks coming out from the anus." Ralph emphasized. "Malfoy, it's all right, it'll only last 48 hours at most." After checking around, Ralph sat down in a chair and chuckled. "Malfoy, right? You'll be the coolest student this year. Your butt will be a streak of sparks and lightning when you're sorted out. Years later, everyone will still remember your entrance. Malfoy touched his butt, a little panicked. No wonder it was burning and painful, like a wooden stick had been stabbed inside. It's not like there's no way to fix it. This is fluid secreted by armadillos. Ralph pulled out a small crystal bottle, his smile strange. Internal and external application. It'll be back to normal in a few hours. Give it to me now. Malfoy reached for the crystal bottle, but Ralph slapped the boy's hand away with his elbow. Malfoy threatened sharply, "My father is a school board member and a good friend of Headmaster Snape. Believe me, I can get him expelled right now." Ralph chuckled, shifting his gaze slightly and narrowing his eyes. "Why are you in our carriage?" I closed the window when I left." "Why is it open now?" Ralph said slowly. "And that matra rat, I left it to guard the carriage. It won't attack wizards unless someone touches the boxes," Ralph calmly said. "Malfoy, you were planning to throw your luggage out the window while we were gone, weren't you?" Hearing this, Hermione, Sherry, and Neville's expressions changed. If it was just causing trouble, that would be one thing, but to try and throw luggage, how despicable. Especially Hermione, who looked like a cat with its fur standing on end. She had the most stuff with her. If she weren't afraid of being expelled, Hermione would have loved to grab Sherry's baseball bat and make Malfoy have a wild idea like Kennedy. Malfoy looked somewhat uncomfortable, then quickly retorted in a soft, feminine voice, "Don't talk nonsense, you have no evidence." "Yes, we really have no evidence," Ralph nodded slightly. "Even if you tell the professor, the school won't punish you. Besides, your father Lucius has connections with Headmaster Snape, he can pull strings." "Good to know." Malfoy became even more arrogant, smugly saying, "Then hurry up and hand over the antidote to me, apologize to me, and give me all your galleons, otherwise, when my father comes, he'll expel you all." "Expelled? I don't even have an acceptance letter from Hogwarts, how can he expel me?" Ralph laughed. "Malfoy, but you have connections, you decide, since you're going to be expelled anyway, as a parting gift, let this bag spider bite you too." Ralph picked up the cage and placed the bag spider in front of Malfoy. Malfoy shuddered, stammering, his voice hoarse, "Don't, it's all a misunderstanding, it's all my fault, I apologize." "Apologize already? I thought you could hold out a little longer." Ralph patted Malfoy's shoulder. "To be honest, I still prefer your rebellious side." Malfoy stared at the spider, pale-faced, yet still trying to maintain a smile, looking utterly ridiculous. He pleaded, "Please forgive me this time. Goyle and Crabbe sent me. Since you've said that, we'll be classmates from now on, so I have to give you a chance to redeem yourself." Ralph tilted his head and chuckled. "But this potion can't be given to you for free." "Of course not." Malfoy quickly said, "I can buy it." 10 galleons, is that enough?" 10 galleons, Ralph stared at Malfoy, disdainfully. "Are you trying to fob me off? This bottle is worth more than 10 galleons, it's an antique from the Victorian era. You can't get this for less than 100 galleons in Nocturne Alley, huh? So the Malfoys are that poor?" Malfoy was furious. He hated being called poor. Who did they think they were? "I only brought 200 galleons, here you go." Malfoy pulled out a lizard skin wallet and took out a handful of galleons. 200 galleons, barely enough, we're classmates, I'll take a loss." Ralph looked like he'd been cheated. 200 and he still thought it wasn't enough. Malfoy was so angry he felt like vomiting blood. This was all the pocket money he'd brought, he really didn't have any spare cash. His family was indeed wealthy, but Hogwarts was a boarding school, there was nowhere to spend money, so he hadn't brought many galleons. He reached for the potion, but Ralph frowned again. Malfoy cursed inwardly, this bastard really didn't keep his word. Ralph crouched down, put his arm around Malfoy's shoulder, and sighed, "I've paid for the medicine, but you've given the 4 of us such a fright. It's unreasonable not to compensate us." Malfoy was on the verge of tears. "But I'm out of money. Could you write me an IOU?" "An IOU?" Ralph shook his head. "Forget about that. If you don't have money, use magical items as collateral. Your wallet is made of shape-shifting lizard skin. Do you think I don't know it can hold a lot of things?" Malfoy stared at Ralph, completely dumbfounded. In front of everyone, he raised his hand and slapped himself hard. Why did you have to provoke him? Thanks to True Fragrance Master, Stupid Zin, Moonwheel Solo Dance, Book Friend 20200305164733887 inches, and sending you a little chrysanthemum for their generous donations. Chapter 9 The Great Hufflepuff. I've closed the door for you. Oh, no need to stand up, just sit down. Goodbye, Mr. Scamander. Malfoy nodded and bowed, smiling carefully as he slowly closed the carriage door, his smile immediately fading. Two short, chubby guys ran over from the corner. Goyle, looking at the pale-faced Malfoy, said gruffly, "Draco, are you alright? What could be wrong with me?" Malfoy looked somewhat uneasy, his face darkening. "You don't think that kid Scamander is a match for me, do you? But I just had a wizard duel with Scamander, and I almost made him drop out, but none of them were a match for me. I was just feeling a bit unwell today, otherwise I could have made them all cry, but aren't you too annoying?" "Why so many buts?" "But," Goyle and Crabbe said in unison, "your butt is sparking, and you've burned a hole in your robe. Quick, put it out." "This is a high-end item I ordered from Madame Malkin's robes," Malfoy screamed. Goyle and Crabbe both reached out to pat Malfoy's butt, but it was no use. Sparks flew everywhere, and his stomach rumbled, intermittently releasing pungent fumes. The methane-rich gas caused Malfoy's buttocks to erupt in bursts of brilliant flames, leaving Goyle and Crabbe covered in soot. A shout rang out from inside the carriage, "Keep it down!" Malfoy immediately shuddered, his gradually unruly demeanor vanishing, replaced by gentleness and politeness. "Sorry, I'll move away a bit, so as not to disturb you, Mr. Scamander." Goyle and Crabbe exchanged a glance. This was the one that nearly got Scamander expelled? "Let's go." Malfoy, no longer caring about his image in front of his underlings, hurriedly led his two followers away. After running 4 or 5 carriages, Malfoy quickly retrieved a bottle of armadillo secretions. He opened the bottle, sniffed it, and detected an indescribable pungent odor. Rolf had instructed him to take it internally and apply it externally, so Malfoy had no choice but to pinch his nose and drink half of it. He smacked his lips. It's quite sweet." Malfoy handed the bottle to Goyle and Crabbe, instructing, "Pour half of this liquid onto the wound on my neck." While the two henchmen cleaned the wound, Malfoy pulled out his now deflated wallet made of shape-shifting lizard skin. The lizard skin was flexible, allowing it to hold significantly more than a regular wallet, which was why he could carry 200 galleons with him. Besides galleons, he had also put many expensive magical items in the wallet, all newly bought, intended to show off at school. Now they were gone, lost to Ralph. What a disaster. He shouldn't have put all his good stuff in the wallet, then it wouldn't have been stolen. At least Scamander had some humanity, he hadn't taken his shape-shifting lizard wallet along with it. After applying the potion, Malfoy felt much better. He said bitterly, "No, I have to get my galleons and everything back, and I have to expel them." "Draco, don't mess with Scamander, he's too dangerous," Goyle said fearfully. "You two are useless," Malfoy roared. "What are you afraid of?" "I'll write to Professor Snape in a bit. For my father's sake, he'll definitely stand up for me. Those guys are packing their bags and getting out of here. I'll make sure they don't even get to see the sorting ceremony." "But, no buts." Malfoy clenched his fists, his face darkening. "If I don't get my revenge, I'm not called Malfoy anymore. I'll change my surname to Scamander." Inside the carriage, Ralph opened the small black leather suitcase. Botricle, Salamander, and Matra Rat lined up and crawled inside. He then stuffed the cage containing the bag spider inside as well. After closing the suitcase, Ralph turned a knob, sat back on the bench, and found everyone staring at him blankly. The boy rested his chin on his hand and smiled. "What's wrong? Your suitcase is so small, how can you fit so much stuff in it?" Hermione asked, voicing the question that had been puzzling everyone. Hermione, needless to say, brought half her house, and even Sherry, who was traveling light, had more luggage than Ralph. The most outrageous thing was that his little suitcase actually contained so many magical creatures. Ralph raised an eyebrow, thought for a moment, then raised a hand, leaving a small gap between his thumb and forefinger, and chuckled, "My suitcase only looks small, it's actually a tiny bit bigger inside than outside." "Alright, stop worrying about my suitcase." Ralph's joking expression faded, and he beckoned, "Come on, let's divide the spoils. I mean, let's divide everyone's compensation for emotional distress." 200 galleons, along with a considerable amount of valuable magical items, were piled on the ground. But no one moved. Each person will receive 50 galleons, and some magical items. Of course, you can sell them second-hand if you don't like them. Ralph leaned back in his chair, tapping one finger lightly against another, and smiled. Don't feel guilty about taking them. Malfoy wanted to throw our luggage out. This is his punishment for doing something wrong. Of course, I know you're all shy. If you don't want the galleons, just leave them with me, Ralph chuckled. I'm opening a veterinary clinic at Hogwarts, and I'm a little short on startup capital. Consider it an investment, it's guaranteed to make a profit. You really want to be a veterinarian? I thought you were joking when you said those things in the hallway, Hermione frowned. I'm serious. Ralph glanced at Hermione and said softly, although it's a veterinarian clinic, we're quite short of nurses. If you and Sherry are free, you can come and help out. I'll provide you with nurse uniforms. Hermione quickly shook her head. She had a feeling Ralph had ulterior motives. Ralph clicked his tongue in disappointment. He really wanted to see the two little girls in their pink nurse uniforms. After a long silence, Shirley looked at Ralph and reminded him, Malfoy doesn't seem like the type to let things go easily. Will he go after his father, the head of the board, and Headmaster Snape? Don't worry, Ralph said casually, leaning back in his chair. My grandfather said if you're in trouble, go to Dumbledore. I'll write a letter to the headmaster later. The head of the board and a mere Slytherin headmaster, how could they be more powerful than the headmaster? I'm sorry, Ralph, Neville said guiltily in a low voice. It's all because of my fight with Goyle and the others that I caused you trouble and made you mess with Malfoy. What are you apologizing for? Ralph looked up and smiled. You didn't do anything wrong, and you don't need to apologize to anyone. We don't cause trouble, but if trouble comes knocking, we're absolutely not afraid of it. Understand? Neville breathed a sigh of relief, his smile returning. He straightened his back, but quickly looked dejected. I really want to go to the same house as you, but you're so outstanding, and I'm afraid I can only go to Hufflepuff. Hermione perked up at the mention of Sorting House, exclaiming excitedly, I definitely can't go to Hufflepuff. I've heard it's full of idiots. I personally hope to be sorted into Gryffindor. Everyone says it's the best. Dumbledore graduated from there, but I don't think Ravenclaw is too bad either. Yeah, that's what everyone says, Neville said in a low voice. But I'll definitely be sorted into Hufflepuff. For so many years, my family has treated me like a muggle. My Uncle Algy always tries to catch me off guard and force me to show off my magic. Once he pushed me off the Black Lake dock, almost drowning me, but nothing happened. I'm really bad at magic. There's nothing wrong with Hufflepuff. Ralph shook his head, his expression serious. Actually, all four houses are the same. There's no superior or inferior house, and I must say, you all greatly underestimate Hufflepuff. Ralph tapped the windowsill lightly with one finger, his face calm and composed, and smiled. If you look through the glorious history of magic, you'll be amazed to find that Hufflepuff has produced so many great wizards. Newt Scamander stood up against Grindelwald when the first Dark Lord swept the globe, and he also compiled the most authoritative textbook on magical creatures. Grogan Stamp was the greatest minister of magic in history. Bridget Winlock was the world's most outstanding arithmetic diviner. Hengist created the best wizarding village, Hogsmeade. Hufflepuff's wizards are no less than any other house, and most importantly, Ralph said solemnly, Hufflepuff has the fewest dark wizards. In the other three houses, some betray their friends for profit, some succumb to fear. Only this house that accepts fools never abandons kindness and loyalty. The Scamander family has always been Hufflepuff. Ralph looked at Neville and smiled. Neville, if you come to Hufflepuff, I'll be happy for you. It's a house worthy of any excellent student. Thanks to the generous Tang Dynasty scholar for the 15,000 coin reward. Thanks to Hua Iuzation and Lu Yifan for their rewards. Chapter 10 Scamander, are you good at fighting? The journey, which began in London and traversed the southeastern plains of England and the Scottish Highlands, finally arrived at Hogsmeade Station late at night. Ralph and his companions changed into robes and followed the flow of people off the train. Many new students were greatly disappointed by the scene before them. Hogsmeade Station, shrouded in night, stood in the middle of nowhere, overgrown with weeds, desolate and dilapidated. Where were the grand castles and mansions promised during admissions? This was utterly disappointing. If they had known it would be like this, they would have cut their admissions. In the distance, the calls of night owls echoed intermittently from the forest, rising and falling, truly eerie, like being in a deserted graveyard. Many young wizards trembled with fear. Neville clung tightly to Raffer, as if only then could he feel safe. Hermione swallowed hard. She now genuinely wanted to drop out and go home. To hell with her witch dreams. Even Sherry subconsciously moved closer to Ralph, not taking her baseball bat off the train, a miscalculation. Ralph chuckled. "You're scared already." Hermione clenched her fists, half stubbornly, half persuading herself. "Who's scared? Good that you're not scared. There's really nothing to be afraid of." Unexpectedly, Ralph changed the subject, deliberately lowering his voice. "By the way, there was once a defense against the dark arts professor who committed suicide by lying on the tracks here, his blood staining the train red. Otherwise, why do you think the train is painted red?" Hermione was terrified again. The boy's face suddenly stiffened. He raised his arm, pointed into the distance, opened his mouth as if to say two words. "A ghost." Hermione, usually so fierce, screamed in terror and quickly hugged Sherry. Shirley comforted the girl first, then looked up at Ralph, giving him a harmless glare. "All right, stop scaring her. It's not really scaring," Ralph explained with a smile. "Some wizards do become ghosts after they die, quite a few at Hogwarts, but they're generally harmless." Shirley seemed thoughtful, so there was something unusual about them. Hermione, on the other hand, gaped in disbelief. Ghosts really existed? This wasn't mentioned in Hogwarts, a history. Just then, a deep voice suddenly rang in everyone's ears. "First-year students, come over here." An incredibly tall giant approached, almost twice the height of an adult, with messy hair, a full beard, and carrying an ancestral, dim yellow oil lamp, his hands polished smooth from years of use. "My name is Rubius Hagrid, the Hogwarts keykeeper. I'm here to guide you to the ferry and into Hogwarts Castle." The young wizards, seeing such a tall man for the first time, stared in disbelief. Although Hagrid looked fierce, he was incredibly gentle with the students. He smiled and said, "Stop daydreaming. Professor Dumbledore is waiting." "All right, first years, keep up. Watch your step." Hagrid, like a giant tractor, slowly led the way. The oil lamp in his hand swayed slightly, its light flickering in the darkness like a lighthouse in the sea. The lamp only illuminated a small area. Goyle and Crabbe, both tall and imposing, guarded the nearly recovered Malfoy, menacingly occupying the brightest spot in the center. Unfortunately, there were just too many people. The young wizards jostled and pushed each other, and Malfoy's smugness didn't last long before he cried out in anguish, "My shoes! My shoes!" Ralph led Neville and his two companions along the edge of the crowd. Several yellow-edged fireflies emerged from his pocket, swirling and emitting a soft glow like streaks of light. After walking along the steep, narrow path for a while, many were exhausted and complained, unwilling to go any further. Hagrid turned around and shouted encouragingly, "Keep going. Just a few more meters, past that bend, and you'll see Hogwarts Castle. Don't give up, or you'll miss the most beautiful sight in the wizarding world." The young wizards were intrigued. They continued downhill, hurrying to the end, turning off the steep rock face, and finally suddenly found themselves on a large stone plaza. The view opened up dramatically, making them hold their breath. A large lake came into view, and on the opposite shore, atop a high hillside, stood a majestic, 1,000-year-old castle, its spires towering, its lights blazing, a scene otherworldly. There was no moon tonight, but the candlelight flickering within Hogwarts Castle reflected in the lake, shimmering and sparkling like daylight. Ralph stood by the lake, and even he found the scene a sight rarely seen in his life. Hagrid was pleased with the young wizard's expression. This was his favorite annual ritual. Reaching the dock where the small boats were moored, Hagrid called out, "Everyone, take a boat across the lake. No more than 4 people per boat." Ralph jumped onto a small boat, followed closely by Hermione, Sherry, and Neville. Hagrid squatted alone on another boat. His enormous size made him look like an elephant stuffed into a refrigerator, a comically comical sight. "Everyone on board? All right, let's go." The small boat, without oars or sails, moved on its own, bobbing up and down in the rapids, waves constantly splashing onto the young wizard. Neville turned to the side, gripping the gunwale tightly with both hands as if afraid of falling into the water. His voice trembled as he asked, "Why do we have to take a boat? Do we have to take a boat to get to school from now on?" Hermione, the walking encyclopedia, whispered, "It's mentioned in Hogwarts, a history that crossing the lake is a traditional Hogwarts ceremony. Every year when first-year students arrive at school, they must cross the lake in a small boat and finally reach the castle. This is to imitate the scene of the 4 great wizards who first founded Hogwarts arriving." Shirley sat on the side of the boat, scooping up a handful of water. Ripples spread gently in her palm. She suddenly turned her head, her wine-red ponytail swinging in a beautiful arc in the air. The girl pointed into the distance and asked, "What's that, Ralph?" who was sitting nearby and almost got hit by the ponytail, explained softly, "It's the ruby short-tail fish unique to Black Lake." Ralph pulled out a handful of bait from somewhere and scattered it into the lake. Nearly 100 ruby short-tail fish crowded together, creating rolling red waves, a truly spectacular sight. Shirley stood in the center of the small boat, gazing into the distance, and whispered, "So beautiful." "Yeah." Ralph smacked his lips, his mouth watering. "The flesh must be delicious. We shouldn't come back empty-handed fishing here." The small boat crossed the lake without incident and arrived at a place resembling an underground dock. The group disembarked and climbed a slope along a cobblestone path, eventually reaching a flat, damp meadow. They followed the stone steps to a massive oak door. Hagrid raised his enormous fist and knocked 3 times on the castle door. The door creaked open, and out stepped a middle-aged man. Upon seeing the man, Malfoy perked up. He immediately went to greet him, whispering something to him, and a moment later swaggered over to Ralph. That arrogant air was back. Malfoy's face was defiant, as if to say, "Scamander, you think you're so great at fighting? What good is fighting if you can't get anywhere? You need power, you need connections." Ralph gave Malfoy a speechless glance. The sun had come out, the rain had stopped, and he thought he was invincible again. Chapter 11 Professor Snape, how can I live without you? Calling Malfoy a nobody wouldn't be entirely accurate, but saying he's a bully who uses his master's power to intimidate others is absolutely true. Especially after the middle-aged man appeared, he jumped around, arrogant and overbearing, practically shouting, "Everyone here is trash." Malfoy had even fantasized about expelling Ralph from Hogwarts, using that to establish his authority and become the leader of the first-year students. Then, he'd recruit Harry Potter, the savior, to his side, beat up Gryffindor, kick Hufflepuff, and beat Ravenclaw, becoming the student leader of Hogwarts. The middle-aged man strode over, instantly drawing everyone's attention. Empty eyes, a strikingly hooked nose, greasy black hair, a flamboyant gait, and that white and black cloak that dragged on the ground, unwashed for a full 6 months. He was so striking, like an old bat in the dark, so vivid, so outstanding, that when he approached the young wizard, everyone was still reeling from the shock. Could there really be such a handsome, greasy person in the world? "Professor Snape, it's him." Malfoy leaned closer, a pungent odor hitting him, almost making him faint. "It's him, the one who kept Matra rats, and stole my galleons, magical items." Malfoy sneezed several times, rubbing his eyes. Ouch, that smell stung his eyes. Professor Snape narrowed his dark eyes, first scanning the crowd as if searching for someone, before finally fixing his gaze on Ralph and lazily asking, "Is that what he said?" Ralph showed no fear or panic. He stood there calmly, without even a hint of feigned composure, simply shrugging and asking, "Any evidence?" "Of course." Malfoy puffed out his chest, pointing to his neck. "This is the bite wound from the Matra rat. Goyle and Crabbe are witnesses." Ralph leaned closer, and Malfoy shrank back fearfully, but remembering Snape's presence and the many people watching, he couldn't afford to lose face. "I'm not afraid of you," he yelled. "Without Matra rat attacking me, you're nothing, that's it." Ralph chuckled softly. "You call that a wound? It looks more like a hickey to me. I saw Goyle and you kissing outside the train toilet, and he gave you a hickey on the neck." Neville and the others are witnesses. Everyone turned to look at Neville. Stared at by so many people, he was a little scared, but as the underling, he couldn't back down now. Neville repeated what Ralph had taught him. "I saw Goyle and Malfoy kissing, they were hugging, and Crabbe was pushing his butt." Sherry calmly said, "I saw them kissing too." Hermione hesitated. She never lied, but she was also worried about Ralph being expelled. Finally, she gritted her teeth and nodded. The young wizards gathered around, cheering and making noises. They hadn't expected to hear such news on their first day of school. How exciting! Malfoy flew into a rage, jumping up and down, shouting, "You're talking nonsense. You're lying." A witch who looked like a poodle rushed out from the crowd, covering her face and sobbing, "Draco, no wonder you didn't want to be my boyfriend, so you like Goyle. I should have known, you two are always together, pansy." "Don't believe them." Malfoy was provoked even more, trembling with anger, gritting his teeth. "Quiet," Snape said coldly. "Draco, is there any other evidence?" "Yes, and the antidote for the Matra rat. Scamander gave it to me." Malfoy hurriedly pulled out a small bottle and handed it over. Snape took the bottle, opened it slightly, sniffed it, and nodded. It's armadillo urine. This is the best antidote for Matra rats." "Armadillo urine?" Malfoy exclaimed incredulously. Impossible, absolutely impossible. What? Snape frowned, glancing at Malfoy. Are you questioning my judgment? No, Professor, I mean, how could it be urine? Malfoy struggled. I drank it, how could urine be sweet? Snape's focus wasn't on the sweetness or sourness. He frowned slightly. Armadillo urine applied to wounds can cure Matra rat poison. Why did you drink it? Maybe, Ralph chimed in, that armadillo had severe diabetes, so its urine was sweet. As for why this Malfoy drank urine, perhaps it's a personal quirk. However, I personally advise young people not to overindulge and to learn moderation. Everyone looked at Malfoy with admiration, completely convinced. They were truly impressed. They hadn't expected such a remarkable person to exist among their peers. Malfoy gagged, thinking about how he had drunk half a bottle and boasted about it to the others back in the Slytherin carriage. He was ready to give up. Snape glanced pityingly at Lucius's simple-minded son, then glared sharply at Ralph. So, you admit that you gave Malfoy that bottle of urine? No, dear Professor Snape, I merely speculated that the armadillo had diabetes, which doesn't mean I gave it to him. Ralph smiled. Besides, Malfoy can't prove that I kept a Matra rat to attack him, but I have evidence to prove my innocence. What evidence? Snape narrowed his eyes. When I entered Platform 9, Mr. Diggory of the Department of Magical Creature Control checked my luggage. He can confirm that I am not carrying any prohibited items, including Matra rats. A letter to the Ministry of Magic is all you need to do. Isn't that more effective than any other evidence? Perhaps some Matra rats attacked Malfoy, but they certainly weren't mine, and they have nothing to do with me, right? Ralph straightened his clothes, stood tall, and said loudly, I don't understand. Does that mean good people who aren't good with words should be wrongly accused? His words were forceful, reasonable, and assertive. The young wizards applauded enthusiastically, looking at Ralph with the eyes of a hero. For a moment, even Malfoy wavered slightly. Had he remembered wrong? Was it really not Scamander who did it? Snape was somewhat surprised, giving Scamander a serious look for the first time. He snorted and said, no need for all that trouble. I'll just check your trunk, no problem, as long as Professor Dumbledore allows it. Ralph smiled. Just then, a tall, dark-haired witch in a bright green robe emerged from the oak door. Her expression was stern. Very well, Professor Snape, you may now return to your desk. Snape's expression was as terrible as if he'd been told he wasn't allowed to sit at the dinner table. He cleared his throat and said, Professor McGonagall, I haven't investigated this matter yet. Leave it to me, Professor Snape. This is Headmaster Dumbledore's order, Professor McGonagall said, pursing her lips. It seems Professor Dumbledore won't allow you to inspect my trunk, Ralph said regretfully. Snape glared fiercely at Ralph, turned, and strode away. This wasn't over. He wouldn't allow his authority to be challenged by a student. Malfoy was dumbfounded. Wait, his patron, Headmaster Snape, had just abandoned him like this? Watching that bat-like figure gradually disappear into the distance, Malfoy wanted to say, Professor Snape, how can I live without you? Professor Snape. Professor, please take me with you. Professor. Chapter 12 Malfoy's Failed Confession. As the saying goes, the more spectacular the entrance, the more pathetic the exit. Malfoy hadn't even left the stage yet, and he already felt utterly defeated tonight. Mr. Scamander, Professor McGonagall approached and asked, you said Mr. Diggory of the Ministry of Magic checked your trunk. Yes, I returned to London from Romania this morning, Ralph said calmly. I ran into them as soon as I got off Platform 7. They said it was a routine check. I will write to verify this. Professor McGonagall nodded, then looked at Malfoy and said, if it's true, proving Mr. Scamander wasn't lying, we will punish you according to school rules. If it's not true, Mr. Scamander will be punished as well. Do you two have anything to add? Malfoy wanted to add something about a minor matter that his father is a school board member, donated 20,000 galleons last year, and will increase his donation this year, but Ralph's gaze fell on him, and Malfoy fell silent, not daring to utter another word. Since no one objects, let's leave it at that, Professor McGonagall announced loudly. All students, follow me into the Great Hall, she then whispered. Mr. Scamander, after the banquet, you'll need to go to Professor Dumbledore's office. He needs to speak with you. I understand, thank you, Professor McGonagall, Ralph replied gratefully. Malfoy hadn't gone far when he overheard this conversation and was immediately stunned. Did this guy have connections? Was his backer the headmaster? He was doomed. The drama had come to an end, and under Professor McGonagall's guidance, the young wizards reluctantly entered the Great Hall. As the face of Hogwarts, the Great Hall didn't emphasize ornate decoration, but rather exuded antiquity and grandeur, a Greek-style dome supported by a tall drum base, surrounded by 7 Roman-style Corinthian columns, their shafts exquisitely crafted and covered with intricate carvings. Huge windows made the hall appear extremely spacious and grand, with torches blazing around them, illuminating the gray-white marble floor. But they didn't get to admire her for long before Professor McGonagall led everyone to a small, dark room. They rushed in, jostling and pressing against each other, nervously scrutinizing the tall witch in her emerald green robes. The opening banquet is about to begin, but before you take your seats, you need to be sorted into your houses, many young wizards whispered amongst themselves, but Professor McGonagall merely pursed her lips and gave them a cold glance. The small room fell silent. Each house has a glorious history and has produced many outstanding wizards. I hope you will perform well during your studies, bring glory to your house, and win the ultimate house cup. Violating the school rules will be punished, and in serious cases, you may even be expelled from Hogwarts. Ralph listened quietly to Professor McGonagall's lecture, but when she mentioned expulsion from Hogwarts, not only Sherry and Hermione, but even the honest Neville subconsciously glanced at him. The boy sighed inwardly. He'd only just arrived at Hogwarts and already faced such a huge misunderstanding. In his previous life, he was a model citizen, the kind that would rank highly in Gotham. Professor McGonagall quickly left the room, and everyone immediately perked up, chattering about the sorting ceremony. The sorting ceremony was a Hogwarts tradition, and even wizarding families rarely told their children about the process. Everyone was nervous, sharing as much as they knew about the sorting ceremony as possible. I heard you have to fight trolls, a boy declared confidently. Whoever defeats a troll gets sorted into the best house, really. I can only defeat 3 adult trolls at most. I wonder if that's good enough for everyone's average, a black wizard with dreadlocks asked wistfully. Is the sorting ceremony that simple? I even went to the Heberi Islands last month for special training and killed a black dragon, a fat boy interjected. You're all wrong, another student retorted gruffly. The sorting ceremony involves capturing 10 dark wizards in Nocturne Alley. My great-uncle's neighbor's nephew is an Auror. His information is very accurate. The more they talked, the more terrifying it became, from fighting trolls to killing dragons, destroying Nocturne Alley, and finally having an epic duel with Dumbledore. Had this terrifying protagonist group collectively transmigrated? Walking through the crowd, hearing so many outrageous rituals, Ralph momentarily thought this wasn't the sorting ceremony, but the selection of the 3rd Dark Lord. He wandered around for a while before finally finding Malfoy, who was hiding in a corner with 2 henchmen, but unchanged, he was already causing trouble for other students. So, you're the famous Harry Potter. On the train, Malfoy was bitten by a Matra rat and couldn't meet a legendary Harry Potter, but now he finally had the chance. He was somewhat disappointed. The being who had defeated the Dark Lord as an infant was just a bespectacled, unremarkable-looking, thin boy, like a chick. Malfoy, who had come seeking his reputation, was somewhat disappointed. If it weren't for the unmistakable lightning bolt scar on the boy's forehead, he would have suspected he'd chosen the wrong target. I am Harry Potter, Harry said, adjusting his glasses. What can I do for you? My name is Malfoy, Draco Malfoy. The red-haired boy next to Harry coughed lightly, seemingly trying to suppress a laugh. Is my name funny? Malfoy stared at the red-haired boy, sizing him up, and sneered. I don't need to ask who you are, red-head, freckled face. Lots of kids like rabbits huddle together, but you can't afford to raise them all. You must be from the Weasley family, right? The red-haired boy's face immediately turned bright red. Malfoy didn't even glance at him, turning to Harry and saying, Harry Potter, you'll soon discover that some wizarding families are far better than others. You wouldn't want to be friends with such powerless, shady characters, would you? Come on, be my friend, I can offer you a lot of help. Malfoy extended his hand, wanting to shake Harry's, but Harry ignored him. I think I can tell who the shady characters are, thank you. Malfoy's first attempt at conversation failed, and his already irritated state tonight grew even more furious. He felt like a boy who had been rejected but was unwilling to accept it and wanted to get revenge. If I were you, Potter, I would be very careful, Malfoy said coldly, drawing out his words. You should show some respect, or you'll end up like your parents. Say that again, Harry said, his eyes wide. Oh, you want to fight, is that it? Malfoy rolled up his sleeves and sneered. I've never lost a fight. Oh, really, Malfoy? Ralph suddenly appeared behind him, patted the boy who claimed to have never lost a fight on the shoulder, and said with a smile. I've never lost either. How about we go outside and try it out? Thanks to 20220626112154344 inches for their generous donations. Chapter 13, Oh, there's a ghost. Malfoy realized that Ralph wasn't going to make a move, or release the Matra rats to bite anyone, but instead of feeling relieved, he became even more apprehensive. The boy's face had lost its earlier arrogance. He stood motionless, his voice dry as he said, Mr. Scamander, I was just joking with him. It's just a classmate's joke. A joke. You change your tune quickly. Quite the character. Ralph released Malfoy's shoulder, looking at the light blonde boy, and clicked his tongue. Just now in front of Professor Snape, weren't you quite proud of yourself, reporting me and threatening to expel me? Was that a joke too? I was blind. I was instigated by Goyle and Crabbe. Malfoy didn't hesitate to betray his lackeys. His underlings were meant to be used as scapegoats in times like these. But when he turned his head, he discovered that his two lackeys had already sensed the situation and made their escape. Mr. Scamander, I won't be swayed again. Please forgive me this one more time. Ralph squinted at the guy who was practically swearing an oath. What a staunch Malfoy, and Draco, so opportunistic. This seems to be a traditional Malfoy family tactic, always changing sides when things look bad. Ralph patted Malfoy on the shoulder, not saying anything harsh, but instead flashing a bright smile. Where's your lizard skin wallet? Here. Malfoy hurriedly pulled it out, his face contorted with despair. But it's empty. I gave you all the galleons and magical items, it's alright. As punishment, I hope you'll bring 2 full wallets like this next time you come to see me. Ralph smiled and kindly straightened his wrinkled collar. Of course, you can bring Professor Snape again, or find someone even more powerful to cause me trouble, but next time it'll be 4 wallets. Malfoy felt like he'd had the worst luck in 8 lifetimes to run into Scamander. He stuffed his wallet back into his pocket, intending to slip away, when he heard Ralph say lightly, No need to apologize. Malfoy frowned, glancing at Harry and Ron. He could bow down to Scamander, but these two weren't so keen. Did they deserve it? But after catching a glimpse of Ralph's gaze, they immediately apologized obediently and quickly disappeared. Malfoy secretly vowed that he would learn the most powerful magic from Snape and then come back to thoroughly humiliate Scamander. Fortune changes every 3 months, don't underestimate a young man's potential. Are you two alright? Ralph asked. We're fine, thank you for your help. Harry was very grateful. Malfoy didn't look too good, but his 2 henchmen were tall and fat. If it really came down to a fight, he and Ron probably wouldn't stand a chance. My name is Harry Potter. Hello, my name is Ron Scamander. Ron extended his hand and shook his. Harry was surprised to find that Ron was the only young wizard who didn't exclaim or look shocked when he heard his name, which made him feel quite favorably towards him. My name is Ron Weasley. Ron also extended his hand warmly, and he couldn't wait to ask, why are the Malfoys so afraid of you? He was both gossipy and eager to learn a few tricks. Ron remained calm and composed. He thought for a moment and said, probably because I persuade people with reason. The group chatted for a while, then Ron said goodbye and left. Ron watched the blonde boy's retreating figure and suddenly said, I remember now, I've heard his name before. Is Ron famous too? Harry asked. No. Diggory came over last night. He and my dad are colleagues at the Ministry of Magic, Ron whispered. Diggory said he received orders from the minister to take wizards to the station to check the luggage of a Ralph Scamander. I heard he's extremely dangerous. Harry's mouth dropped open. He couldn't imagine how dangerous an 11-year-old wizard could be that warranted such caution from the Ministry of Magic. Coupled with Malfoy's fear, Ralph's standing in Harry's eyes instantly rose to unprecedented heights. He must be very capable, Harry sighed. Unlike me, who knows nothing. I bet I'll be the worst student and sorted into the worst house. No, there are many students from Muggle families like you, Ron comforted him. True, Harry said, feeling much better. Actually, I'm fine with being sorted anywhere, as long as I don't end up in Professor Snape's house. Why? Ron asked, puzzled. They didn't even know which house Snape was head of, and Harry already didn't want to go? Harry hesitated for a moment, glanced around, lowered his voice, and said quickly, Professor McGonagall just told Headmaster Snape to go back. He walked past us and glanced at me. Harry shuddered and said, "Didn't you see Snape's eyes? He was staring intently into my eyes, like he wanted to gouge them out. I've never seen Headmaster Snape before. I don't know why he looked at me like that." Ron thought for a moment and guessed, could it be that Professor Snape has someone he dislikes who has the same color eyes as you? Possibly. Then next time you see Professor Snape, close your eyes and only let him see your face. He probably won't dislike you anymore, Ron suggested. That makes sense. Harry slapped his thigh, feeling that Ron was really clever. Ralph's goal was to settle scores with Malfoy, and helping Harry and Ron out of the predicament was just a coincidence. He didn't actually have much interest in the two of them. Playing with pets, that was Dumbledore's hobby. Ralph only liked taming. They weren't on the same wavelength. Ralph refused to believe that staying away from Harry, this source of trouble, would prevent him from graduating peacefully. After all, he was a good kid who didn't like causing trouble. As the discussion heated up, the sorting ceremony was no longer the focus. The young wizards began voting on the most terrifying sorting ceremony. Unexpectedly, the top vote-getter wasn't fighting a troll or battling a dragon, but rather, washing Professor Snape's hair. Snape's greasy hair looked like it hadn't been washed in 6 months. If washing his hair was the only way to get into Good House, more than half the students said they wanted to drop out and go home. When Ralph returned, he found Hermione muttering to herself again, waving her wand incessantly, as if performing a wand dance. Absurdly, Neville also joined in with his wand waving, but his was far less graceful, looking more like he was having an epileptic seizure. Ralph walked over to the most normal-looking girl with a ponytail and asked softly, "Shirley, what are they doing?" "Are they preparing for their sorting ceremony performance? They're memorizing spells," Shirley whispered. "Hermione's guessing the school will sort the young wizards based on their progress. Well, it's a perfect recreation of their encounter at the platform." "I didn't expect Hermione to still be so fixated on that idea." "Then why aren't you memorizing?" Ralph asked. Shirley blinked, a slight smile playing on her lips. "You think it's silly too, right?" Ralph chuckled. "Looks like out of the 4 of us, only the 2 of us are normal. Hermione and Neville are 2 idiots." Ralph underestimated Hermione's hearing. The moment he said idiots, the girl suddenly perked up her ears, her eyes instantly scanning him. She stopped memorizing spells, crossed her arms, walked over, and sneered, "Are you talking bad about me again?" "No, I was just discussing with Shirley whether the spells you're memorizing will work on ghosts." Ralph lied effortlessly. "I heard that the sorting ceremony is actually to deal with ghosts," Hermione said with a playful, almost idiotic, look. Ralph suddenly looked terrified, glancing behind the girl as if he'd seen something sinister. Hermione's smile froze instantly. She turned her head, but only halfway before quickly turning back. A smirk played on her lips as she looked at Ralph, laughing. "Not again. You think I'd fall for that? Scamander. You're the real idiot." Her laughter revealed a pair of prominent front teeth, clearly smug. Ralph looked at her strangely. Sherry simply blinked, pursed her lips, and didn't laugh out loud. "Excuse me, could you move aside? You're blocking my way," a sinister voice sounded. Hermione turned her head. A pearly white, translucent ghost floated behind her, its head swaying as it slid off its neck and onto its shoulder, as if hinged. Not far away, about 20 equally terrifying and hideous ghosts floated, with large, blood-red lanterns hovering beside them. "Ah, there are ghosts. Thanks to Tang Dynasty Scholar and I am Liu Guanggaio for their generous donations." Chapter 14 Hannah, the Ironclad One. Professor McGonagall had only been gone from the small room for 5 minutes when she rushed back. The noise from the small room was so loud that not only the Great Hall, separated by only a wall, could hear it, even from upstairs where she was going to retrieve the sorting hat. Anyone who didn't know better would think there was a dragon living there. She entered the room and suddenly raised her voice, shouting, "I can hear you all arguing in my office. You're the loudest people in the whole castle. If I hadn't come, would you have torn the castle down?" With her arrival, the young wizard seemed to press a mute button, immediately becoming as docile as quails. Professor McGonagall gave the group a stern look. In all her years of teaching, she had never seen such noisy young wizards. This year's students, terribly. "What's going on?" Professor McGonagall walked towards a corner of the room, where she saw more than 20 ghosts floating around. "I was just about to perform the Louis V. Pleasure stage," Nick, nearly headless, said apologetically, adjusting his severed head. But I think I scared this little girl, Sir Nicholas of Mincy. I told you your art is outdated. My Kennedy headshot technique is much more in line with modern aesthetics, a ghost with a gaping hole in its head chuckled. As an artist, if you don't pursue novelty, you'll be eliminated by the time sooner or later, Mr. Casper, what are you saying? Getting shot by a muggle's gun is art, Nick retorted. That's just a temporary trend, but art is classic beauty, eternal beauty. It doesn't become outdated. Alright, stop arguing, Professor McGonagall said sternly. Miss Granger, are you alright? Do you need to go to the school hospital? I'm fine now, Hermione shook her head, still shaken. I gave her some chocolate, Professor, Ralph whispered. Is that so? Professor McGonagall gave him an approving look. Mr. Scamander, if we weren't sorted yet, I would definitely give you 2 extra points. Now, line up in a single file and follow me into the Great Hall, Professor McGonagall said. While Professor McGonagall turned around, Hermione nudged Ralph twice with her elbow. You scared me. Ralph grimaced, rubbing his back, but he knew he was in the wrong and didn't retaliate. After lining up, everyone left the room, passed through the foyer, and entered a magnificent Great Hall through double doors. If the main hall was simple and grand, emphasizing the display of historical heritage, then the Great Hall was the epitome of luxury. The entire Great Hall was rectangular, with single green granite pillars carved with numerous patterns supporting a dome that was 100 feet high. In the ceiling above the dome, starlight twinkled, clouds rolled and surged like raging waves, and occasionally a comet appeared in the sky. A streak of rainbow light moved from west to east, like a projection of the deep starry sky. Thousands of candles floated in the air, illuminating the spacious auditorium like daytime. In the center of the auditorium stood 4 long tables made of rosewood, laden with gleaming gold platters and silver goblets, their sides filled with students. At the head of the hall, another long table stood on the platform, the teachers' seats. Many students were stunned. The resentment they felt upon disembarking from the train vanished completely. Eton College, Oxford, Cambridge, they wouldn't even consider it. Professor McGonagall placed a stool before the long table, and on the stool, a wizard's hat. The hat was old, patched, and thickly dusty, as if it hadn't been cleaned for centuries. Suddenly, the hat began to writhe, seemingly dancing, but more like random twitches. Not content with just dancing, a crack appeared in its brim, like a mouth, and it began to hum a self-composed song. You may not think I'm pretty, but don't judge a book by its cover. If you could find a hat more beautiful than mine, I'd eat myself. Try it on, and I'll tell you which house you'll be sorted into. You might be Gryffindor, where courage lies hidden deep within, whose boldness, spirit, and generosity make Gryffindor stand out. You might be Hufflepuff, where people are honest and loyal, whose students are steadfast, truthful, and unafraid of hard work. If you're clever, you might be Ravenclaw, where wise and learned people always find their kindred spirits, or you might be Slytherin, where you'll make friends, but the cunning will stop at nothing to achieve their goals. Wormy. Don't be afraid. Don't panic. After the song, the entire hall erupted in applause, as if it were a concert rather than a sorting ceremony. The Sorting Hat bowed to the 4 dining tables, then gestured towards Professor McGonagall, whispering, "Little McGonagall, my sonnet isn't bad, is it?" Professor McGonagall wanted to say it wasn't as down-to-earth as the ghost's art, but the Sorting Hat was only 1,000 years old and couldn't bear such harsh words. McGonagall could only say tactfully, "It seems a bit regressive, but it's still a divine song." "I feel the same way," the Sorting Hat sighed. "It needs to be refined further." "I'll let you hear the new song when it's finished." Professor McGonagall's lips twitched. After decades of listening to the Sorting Hat's hoarse voice, she was thoroughly tired of it. It was truly torture. Maybe when she became the headmistress, she should cancel the Sorting Hat's singing. Professor McGonagall paused for 2 seconds, then pulled a roll of parchment from her sleeve. "Whoever's name I call, put on the hat, sit down, and be sorted." Hannah Abbott, a rosy-cheeked little girl with 2 golden pigtails, stepped out of the line and sat down. The Abbott family had a long history, migrating from Milan to England with the Roman army on their conquest of Britain. The Abbott family was also renowned for their blacksmithing, often referred to in magical history as the Little Blacksmiths of Milan or the Indestructible Abbott. The Sorting Hat made its decision without much hesitation, and the little girl, with her 2 cute pigtails, ran back to the Hufflepuff dining table. Hufflepuff had won first place, and the little badgers cheered excitedly. Neville was still stammering through his spells, trying to use the last bit of time to improve himself. He'd inquired around beforehand, and aside from the various sorting ceremony, he'd heard that the worst students weren't sorted into Hufflepuff or expelled, but sent to Azkaban. Neville was terrified, feeling he needed to be rescued. But when he looked up and saw Hannah, Neville stopped reciting his spells and just stared blankly. Ralph nudged him and whispered, "Isn't she cute?" Neville nodded blankly, then quickly shook his head, blushing and stammering, "I just found her pigtails interesting." "Oh, is that so?" Ralph smiled and continued to coax, "If you want to see her every day, you'll have to go to Hufflepuff." Scamander had always been Hufflepuff, so Ralph had already begun to do his best to recruit students for his house. A good kid like Neville, of course, couldn't be let go. Neville, blushing, stared at Hannah, seemingly tempted. He rolled his eyes and suddenly asked, "Ralph, who do you think is cuter, Hermione or Sherry?" Ralph wasn't stupid, he wasn't easily fooled. He shook his head and said, "What did you say?" "I didn't hear you." Hermione, who had been eavesdropping behind him, couldn't help but roll her eyes. "You two are so boring." Sherry covered her mouth and laughed. "Hermione Granger," Professor McGonagall called out. Hermione wanted to ramble on about inner beauty, but Professor McGonagall repeated herself, emphasizing her words. Sherry nudged her back, and the girl finally reacted. She glared at Ralph, ran to the stool, and hurriedly put her sorting hat on. It took a long time before the sorting hat finally called out, "Gryffindor." If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 15: The Difficulty of Sorting Schools. As Professor McGonagall read the list, the young wizards were sorted into their respective houses. After donning the hats, each student's time varied, some taking less than 5 seconds, truly faster than a quick draw gun. Most young wizards finished their sorting within 2 to 3 minutes, then removed their hats and went to their respective houses, looking rather bored. Those who took more than 5 minutes were rare. These students were called sorting problem students by Hogwarts. Sorting problem students were suited to several houses simultaneously, and the sorting hat struggled to make a quick decision, requiring utmost caution. True sorting problem students were rare, appearing only once every half-century. Most were students who came close to being sorting problem students. For example, Hermione's sorting hat took nearly 4 minutes to make a decision. Soon it was Neville's turn. He was running too fast and suddenly, with a thud, he fell heavily to the ground. Whether the ground was slippery or Neville was faking it, he slid 3 or 4 meters, as if he were rubbing against a floor. Even Professor McGonagall felt pain, but Neville seemed unfazed and got up again, running towards the sorting hat. Professor McGonagall's eyes lit up. This was a promising Quidditch player, unafraid of falling, even able to fake it, could be groomed for Defensive Player of the Year. After another long period of assessment, Neville seemed to be arguing with his sorting hat. He even glanced up at Ralph. Finally, the sorting hat announced weakly, "Hufflepuff." Standing in the crowd, Ralph smiled with satisfaction. Hadn't he just lured the Gryffindor sword saint away? Who said the Hufflepuff sword saint couldn't draw the Gryffindor sword? Shirley Swinton. Shirley walked to the stool, the sorting hat almost touching her head when it called out loudly, "Ravenclaw." Shirley removed the hat, smoothed a few strands of hair clinging to her cheek, tilted her head, glanced at Ralph still in line and Hermione who had already gone to Gryffindor, then walked towards the Ravenclaw table. From a distance, they couldn't see clearly, only recognizing an incredibly thin girl. But now, closer, they realized she was an exceptionally beautiful young woman. Her skin was fair, and her eyes, sparkling like rubies, were moist and bright. She wore a wine-red ponytail that swayed gently behind her. Her frailness gave her a delicate, willow-like appearance, making her all the more endearing. The great hall fell silent. Then, a burst of enthusiastic applause erupted from the Ravenclaw tables. They had won the title of the first-year class beauty, a victory. Penelope, with her brown curls, took Sherry's hand and led her to sit beside her. Next to her sat Cho Chang, also with a ponytail. Her beauty was slightly less striking, but still lovely. The three beauties at the same table instantly attracted countless gazes. Ron, already sorted into Gryffindor, slammed his fist on the table and growled, "I should have gone to Ravenclaw. I should have gone there." George, playing bridge, chuckled, "My dear little brother, do you even have the intelligence to go to Ravenclaw?" Fred, chatting with Angelina, turned and said, "They don't accept idiots there." "I don't care." Ron gazed enviously at the next table, which looked like it was New Year's Eve. "All the beauties at Hogwarts are in Ravenclaw." His words instantly offended all the girls at the Gryffindor table, including Professor McGonagall, who wasn't too far away. "Fred, is this guy your brother?" Angelina raised her thick eyebrows. "Oh, he's actually adopted," Fred quickly replied. "We've never really known him since we were little," George added. "Ron." The number of students gradually decreased, and with the famous Harry Potter sorted into Gryffindor, it was finally Ron's turn. "Another Scamander," a faint voice reached his ears as Ron put on the sorting hat. "Difficult, very difficult. You're clearly very intelligent and talented. Slytherin and Ravenclaw would both be suitable for you. Where should I sort you?" The sorting hat was troubled. No Hufflepuff." Ralph was quite surprised. "Hufflepuff is suitable for honest and loyal students, and you don't fit the description at all," the sorting hat said regretfully. "You should go to Slytherin. The students there are cunning as foxes, willing to use any means to achieve their goals. Slytherin can help you achieve glory, without a doubt." "Is this an insult?" Ralph sighed. "Everyone who knows me praises my honesty and reliability. I'm known throughout the surrounding villages for my honesty and reliability. If someone falls on the roadside, I'll help them up. If an old lady doesn't want to cross the street, I'll force her across. Then you should definitely go to Slytherin." The sorting hat grinned. "Everyone around you has misjudged you, which means you're very shrewd, a born Slytherin. But your shamelessness and self-aggrandizement are very much like Gryffindor's style. Why don't you go to Gryffindor? Are you sure you're not mistaken?" "Let me see again," Ralph insisted. "Why do you want to go to Hufflepuff?" the sorting hat asked, puzzled. Just now, a boy named Neville Longbottom had told him to go to Gryffindor, but he insisted on going to Hufflepuff and even argued with it. In previous years, many students desperately didn't want to go to Hufflepuff, so why is it suddenly so popular this year? Has Honest House finally seen a resurgence? "Scamanders have always been Hufflepuffs," Ralph explained. "It's normal for a family to have a few outcasts occasionally, like the Black family, which isn't all Slytherin. They've had Gryffindors too," the sorting hat stated unequivocally. "You are that outcast from the Scamander family. You might be mistaken." "Haven't you sorted wizards into the wrong houses in the past 1,000 years?" Ralph questioned. "Don't question my expertise," the sorting hat smirked, proudly declaring, "I never make a mistake. Gryffindor took me to every corner of the world, Ravenclaw gave me wisdom, Slytherin taught me how to read people's minds, Hufflepuff gave me the ability to see into human nature. I also know the secrets of past headmasters, and have read countless magical texts. In fact, I know everything that has happened since the beginning of the millennium." "Know everything?" Ralph raised an eyebrow and muttered, "You only dare to boast like that in front of a little wizard like me." The sorting hat immediately became displeased. "Kid, you can ask me a question. If I can't answer it, I'll send you to Hufflepuff." "Wait, it has to be related to magic. Muggle stuff won't do. What if this kid does some Muggle math or physics that I don't know either?" The sorting hat felt really clever. "You said it yourself," Ralph chuckled, then pondered for a moment. "I want you to come up with a magical problem whose answer you don't know." The sorting hat's smile froze, speechless for a moment. If 5 minutes was considered a challenging sorting problem, then Ralph sitting on a small stool for a full 20 minutes was no longer a challenging problem, but a sorting problem prodigy. He had far surpassed the record for the longest sorting session since the school's founding, but the sorting hat seemed unwilling to make a decision. It was still racking its brains. A magical problem whose answer it didn't know. Since it was a problem whose answer it didn't know, if it actually figured it out, wouldn't that contradict its omniscience? But if it couldn't figure it out, then it wasn't omniscience either. "This problem is too difficult. I can't do it." Wearing the hat for too short a time is bad, as it easily leads to the thought that one is not capable enough, but too long a time also wears down everyone's patience and fatigue. At the Gryffindor dining table, Ron was practically starving. He slumped over the table and asked, "Are we still sorting?" Probably because Ron is too good, the sorting hat is having a hard time deciding. Harry sighed again. Ron's image in his mind had risen even higher. Hermione seemed quite worried. What if the sorting hat discovered Ron wasn't a good student and actually expelled him? She'd only joked about expelling him before. Not far away, Shirley rested her elbow on the table, propped her chin on her hand, and stared blankly at the boy. Neville was very anxious. The Sorting Hat had sent him to Gryffindor, and he'd insisted on Hufflepuff. Now that he was here, would Ron go to another house? Boss, don't do this to me. Of course, the most nervous was Malfoy. He was jumping up and down in a panic. Had the Sorting Hat recognized Scamander's sins and was going to expel him? Good heavens. No, the Sorting Hat should just shout. Azkaban. Malfoy thought anxiously. 10 more minutes passed, and Ralph's Sorting Hat had already lasted longer than all the previous Sorting Hats combined. Ralph himself was fast asleep, his head occasionally drooping like a chick pecking at rice. Professor McGonagall's face was as black as the silt at the bottom of a black lake. She was about to interrupt the Sorting Hat process when it finally made a decision that went against its ancestors. It cried out in heart-wrenching sobs, its voice filled with weakness, helplessness, grievance, and resentment. Hufflepuff. P.S. Influenced by the protagonist, Neville went to Hufflepuff. This change isn't actually abrupt. In the original story, Neville wanted to go to Hufflepuff, not Gryffindor. The official website describes it as follows: during the sorting ceremony, Neville Longbottom and the Sorting Hat had a heated debate. Neville felt Gryffindor's reputation for bravery and awe was intimidating, believing he was best suited for Hufflepuff, but the Sorting Hat insisted he would excel in Gryffindor. Influenced by the protagonist, Ralph, Neville became even more determined, so here, the butterfly effect led him to Hufflepuff. Chapter 16 Rebuilding Hufflepuff's Glory. It is our duty to do. After Ralph's sorting was completed, everyone applauded, genuinely and heartfelt. Finally, it was over. If the sorting had gone on until the wee hours, would we even have a proper meal? Many stood up, eager to see what this little wizard who had put the Sorting Hat in such a difficult position looked like. After seeing him, another familiar sigh of regret followed, but unlike Sherry's, this time it was mostly from witches. Lavender Brown of Gryffindor craned her neck to see Ralph walk towards the Hufflepuff table, where he was greeted by the equally handsome Cedric Diggory. Lavender Brown tore at her hair, utterly devastated. I should have gone to Hufflepuff. All the handsome guys at Hogwarts are at Hufflepuff. The male wizards at the Gryffindor table looked speechlessly at Lavender, then at Ron. You two are a perfect match. Truly a perfect couple. The Hufflepuff Badgers cheered, and even Sprout, in the VIP seat, breathed a sigh of relief. Hufflepuff couldn't be without Scamander, just as the West couldn't be without Jerusalem. After Ralph, the Sorting Hat's efficiency suddenly increased, completing a student's sorting in almost 3 seconds. With the last student, Blaise Sabine, being sorted into Slytherin, the entire sorting ceremony concluded. Gryffindor got the boy who lived, Ravenclaw got the class flower, Hufflepuff got Scamander. Whether it was a big win or a small win, everyone had a bright future. Only Slytherin felt numb with defeat, as if they hadn't gotten any new students to be proud of. You mean Malfoy? That guy who revealed his sexual orientation on day 1? Let's not talk about him. Headmaster Albus Dumbledore, sitting in the VIP seat, stood up. He wore a moon-white robe with large red and gold weft threads, embroidered with phoenix patterns and unicorn fur. The gold and emerald shone brightly, making him appear exceptionally magnificent. Dumbledore still wore his semicircular spectacles, his nose was sharply hooked, and his hair and beard were silver white, the ravages of time etched on his aged face. The old man looked around, a broad smile on his face, and opened his arms to the students. Welcome. Welcome to Hogwarts for the start of the new school year. Before the feast begins, I only have one thing to say: idiots. Crybabies. Trash. Twisters. Thank you all. He sat down again, and the students exchanged bewildered glances, their minds screaming, what are you saying? Why do I understand each word individually, but not when they're put together? The young wizards looked at each other's reactions, some were nodding incessantly, seemingly savoring the headmaster's words. Could he understand? So, to avoid appearing too stupid, many began nodding and clapping wildly, as if they truly understood. In the main seating area, the professors also clapped, with Professor Quirrell, the newly appointed Defense Against the Dark Arts professor with a scarf wrapped around his head, clapping particularly enthusiastically. He seemed worried that if he didn't give the headmaster face, he'd be expelled tomorrow for stepping into the Great Hall with his left foot first. Professor Snape, however, didn't applaud. Instead, his face was stern and his expression gloomy. Losing the Defense Against the Dark Arts position for the 10th time, it was impossible not to feel resentment. Snape touched his greasy hair, which hadn't been washed since summer vacation, and glanced at Quirrell with some disdain. He hadn't even won against this unhygienic, foul-smelling guy who habitually trembled when he saw anyone. As the applause ended, countless dishes suddenly appeared on the table: roast beef, roast chicken, roast pork chops, boiled potatoes, roasted potatoes, fried potatoes, braised potatoes, curry potatoes, potato and potato pancakes. Although the food was plentiful, the British truly had a mysterious love for potatoes, and even wizards were no exception. The students, having traveled all day by train and experienced an extended sorting ceremony, were already starving and began to feast. Rove was caught between Hannah and Neville. He wanted to switch places with Neville, but the latter absolutely refused. So shy, yet he wants to pilot a warship. Compared to Neville's shyness, Hannah was much more outgoing. With a chicken leg in her left hand and a duck neck in her right, her mouth greasy, she excitedly said, "Hello, my name is Hannah Abbott." "Hello," Ralph said, taking a sip of warm milk to warm his stomach. He glanced at her two adorable pigtails and smiled. "My name is Ralph Scamander. I know you. I saw you catch that spider on the train. That was amazing." Hannah rolled up another piece of cheese and ate it in large bites, laughing heartily. "I'm short. I couldn't squeeze into the crowd, so I didn't see the big spider clearly." "Ralph, when do you have time to let me see it?" As a good friend, Ralph couldn't just chatter away. He pointed at Neville and said, "Sure, but Neville is keeping the spider for now. Go find him when you want to see it, right?" Neville, but he received no reply. Rove turned his head and saw Neville staring blankly at Hannah. The boy nudged him, and Neville snapped out of his daze, saying somewhat bewilderedly, "Potatoes are pretty good." Rove took a deep breath, feeling exhausted and unable to handle the situation. Hannah glanced at the dazed Neville, assuming he was frightened by her eating habits. The girl blushed, quickly wiping the butter from her mouth, and feigning shyness, said weakly, "I'm actually quite afraid of spiders, and cockroaches and toads too." "Really?" Susan Burns laughed from the side. "I remember you crushed several cockroaches with your bare hands on the train, and you even said fried toads are the best." Neville was shocked, while Leif, the toad hiding nearby eating freeze-dried hawkrip, trembled even more. It objected to this marriage. Hannah, with her two pigtails sticking up, felt her carefully constructed image was completely ruined. She reached out and pinched Susan's ear, saying angrily, "If you keep talking nonsense." Susan grabbed Hannah's pigtails, lifting them slightly, and yelled, "Hit me first." The two had known each other for a long time, but were clearly just superficial friends. Justin Finley was introducing his family situation. "I was originally going to Eton, but I came to Hogwarts, and I'm really happy. Of course, my mother is a little disappointed." Justin wasn't the only one claiming he almost went to Eton. At the Hufflepuff table alone, Ralph found 5 or 6. Eton per person, huh? The number of students Eton loses each year is practically an unsolved mystery, just like the loss of Laffy in 1982. Sitting opposite, Ernie Macmillan seemed quite puzzled by his absence from Slytherin. He complained, "My family has been lineage of pure-blood wizards for 9 generations, my blood is purer than anyone else's." Macmillan displayed his monstrous markings, attempting to prove his bloodline was indeed pure. "How is your friend?" A ghost floated over. He was a bloated, fat man wearing a bowler hat in traditional Catholic attire. "A Hogwarts Christian? You mean Hermione?" Ralph scrutinized the fat ghost with interest, then said softly, "She's all right now, don't worry, that's good." "I told you not to let Nick go around scaring people." The fat ghost chuckled, his eyes narrowing into slits. He seemed to know what Ralph was thinking, and explained softly, "I was a Hufflepuff student, and after graduating, I became a monk at the church. Everyone calls me Fat Brother, but I'd prefer you call me Cardinal." "Yes, Fat Brother." The Fat Brother's appearance attracted the attention of many young wizards. This was a Catholic, appearing at Hogwarts, a place full of wizards. It was like a high-scoring video of advanced mathematics appearing in Asia, utterly inappropriate, practically heresy. The portly monk didn't mind. He turned to the newcomers and said gently, "New students of Hufflepuff, I hope you can do your best to help the Academy win this year's Academy Cup, okay? Hufflepuff hasn't won the Academy Cup for 16 years, which was impossible in my time." Since the Academy's ghost had said this, everyone naturally had to show their support. The prefect raised his juice, and all the Hufflepuff students raised their glasses as well, shouting together, "To restore Hufflepuff's glory is our duty." Thanks to Wind-Spirit 15 and Lou Yiffin for their generous donations. Chapter 17, Storming the Principal's Office and Seizing that Bird's Nest Seat. After the grand feast, it was time for dessert: truffles, chocolate muffins, liquor-soaked fruit pudding, various ice creams, and even the ice cream assassins that you wouldn't dare touch in a shop. Dumbledore stood up again, and the great hall gradually quieted down. He looked around and smiled. "I know you're all a bit sleepy and eager to get back to your warm beds, but I still hope you can concentrate and listen to this old man's ramblings about some things to keep in mind for the new semester. The forests near the school are strictly off-limits to students. They're dangerous there, and everyone, whether you're a senior or a first year, must remember this." Ralph raised an eyebrow. "As the saying goes, you haven't truly experienced Hogwarts if you haven't been to the Forbidden Forest. Who would come to Hogwarts if not for those adorable creatures in the Forbidden Forest? Wouldn't it be better for Ralph to go to Edamori?" But this thought had barely formed when Ralph keenly noticed that Dumbledore had glanced at him, intentionally or unintentionally. Although it was just a fleeting look, he still carefully caught it. No, he must be looking at Neville. Ralph is the Scamander's honest boy, he wouldn't get any special attention. Also, Mr. Filch, the caretaker, asked me to remind everyone not to cast spells in the hallways during breaks. If caught, points will be deducted. This time, Dumbledore glanced at the Weasley twins. The brothers were quite self-aware, knowing the headmaster was talking about them, so they began to complain quietly, their words filled with dissatisfaction with Dumbledore's suppression of students' natural instincts. They even said Dumbledore was a stumbling block to holistic education, an obstacle to joyful magic, and should have stepped down long ago to become the vice-headmaster, and so on. After all, what kind of vice-headmaster lasts 20 years? It seemed that as long as Professor McGonagall gave the order, the twins would be willing to do anything, even risk their lives, and storm the headmaster's office, to seize that position and make Professor McGonagall the headmaster. The Weasley brothers' voices weren't loud, but they were quite jarring in the quiet great hall, clearly reaching everyone's ears. Professor McGonagall's face darkened further. This was definitely not how she had taught them. "Those two little rascals." Dumbledore smiled as usual and continued, "The Quidditch player selection process will also take place in the second week of this term. Anyone interested in joining the house Quidditch team, please contact Mrs. Hooch." Mentioning the Quidditch selection, all the house Quidditch captains were eager to recruit and make a name for themselves in the new term. Truman, the Hufflepuff Quidditch captain, hadn't yet led his team to a Quidditch trophy, but they were runners-up last year, and with a full roster this year, they were still considered strong contenders for the championship. The little Badgers looked at Truman with deep affection. "Captain, lead us one more time," crying. Gryffindor Quidditch captain Charlie Weasley graduated 2 months ago to raise dragons in Romania, and the new captain was Oliver Wood. Without his elder brother, Wood had to shoulder a heavy responsibility, so he planned to begin grueling training early tomorrow morning. Captain Charlie used to be too lenient with his team, lacking the toughness and manliness needed. These little lions needed a good slap on the wrist to get them to toughen up. Although they hadn't won the Quidditch Cup for 5 consecutive years, Wood firmly believed that this year was their best chance. Aiming for the championship, Ravenclaw captain Roger Davis wasn't as excited. Their house was historically weak, and he was exhausted from leading them down the semifinals year after year. Davis really wanted to transfer and join the Hufflepuffs who had eliminated them last year. If you can't beat them, join them, it's not shameful. The Slytherin martial arts team was the most excited. Captain Marcus Flint's elbows had gotten even bigger and stronger during the summer. If they couldn't beat them, they'd elbow them. The very last, Dumbledore's gaze swept over everyone. "I must remind you all of something. If you don't want to encounter accidents, pain, or even death, please do not enter the right-hand corridor on the 4th floor. That's an absolute no-go zone." No one laughed, except for the Gryffindor students. Many of the little lions took Dumbledore's warning as a challenge. "All right, before you all go to bed, let's sing the school song together," Dumbledore said loudly. All the teachers' smiles froze, especially Professor Snape's, as if another 3 minutes of darkness were about to begin. Dumbledore flicked his wand, and a long golden ribbon floated out, twisting and coiling like a snake above the high dining table, forming lines of text. "Everyone chooses their favorite tune," Dumbledore said. "Ready, sing." All the teachers and students sang loudly. "Hogwarts, Hogwarts, 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 teach us knowledge. Whether we are balding old men or children with broken knees, our minds can accept some interesting things. Because our minds are now empty, filled only with air, dead flies, and trivialities, they can teach us some valuable knowledge. returning to us what we've forgotten. You just need to do your best, leave the rest to us. We will study hard until we turn to dust." Everyone sang the school song in a scattered way: rock, hip-hop, country, dance, rap, electronic music, and sign language. A diverse array, each vying for attention. Finally, after everyone had sung their own songs, only the Weasley twins hadn't finished, continuing to sing to the melody of Funeral March. "Professor Quirrell, it seems George and Fred Weasley like you very much," Dumbledore said with a kind and gentle expression. "They welcomed your return with a cheerful, joyful tune." "Joyful?" Quirrell's face stiffened. "Wasn't that a funeral dirge?" "Professor Quirrell, I think you've accumulated enough practical experience to handle the defense against the dark arts position, haven't you?" Dumbledore's smile grew even more benevolent. Yes, Professor Dumbledore," Quirrell stammered. "I will do this job well, and not let you down. Don't be nervous, I have high hopes for you too." The old man waved his hand, smiled, and said casually, "I really hope that this time next year, I can sit with you again to listen to this piece. Music is more enchanting than anything we do." When the piece ended, all the students stood up and, led by their prefects, headed towards their respective houses. Ralph didn't follow the Badgers group to Hufflepuff House, but instead followed behind the Gryffindor group. The entrance to the Gryffindor common room was on the 8th floor, as was the entrance to the headmaster's office, and Ralph didn't know the way. It just so happened to be on the way. But the Gryffindor group soon encountered big trouble. Peeves, who had missed the dinner party, attacked the first-year students on the way in revenge. He floated in midair, first using preset traps to keep the older students away, then continuously throwing water bombs at the first years. The water bombs exploded, spraying out icy water that soaked many of the young wizards' clothes, turning them into drowned rats. "Haha, you big idiots in your first year, take this from Peeves." Several more water bombs rained down, and Harry and Ron, frantically dodging, collided violently, falling to the ground with a thud. Then, with a bang, a water bomb struck them both on the head, splashing countless tiny droplets. Harry wiped the water from his face, his robes were completely soaked, and his shoes were practically overflowing with water. Ron plopped down on the ground, furious. "Can't anyone control this guy? Percy polishes his lousy prefect badge all day, wears he when it matters." Nearby, Hermione raised her wand, attempting to cast a spell to drive away Peeves, but to no avail. Instead, she was met with even more violent attacks. The little girl was a bit frustrated. She realized that the spells she'd memorized during summer vacation seemed to be completely useless. If Ralph were here, he could surely drive Peeves away, right? Just then, in the dimly lit corridor, a blond boy carrying a flickering oil lamp walked slowly against the flow of people. "Everyone cover your ears," Ralph's voice reached everyone's ears. They were all confused, not knowing why, but Hermione had already quickly covered her ears. Seeing this, the others followed suit. A piercing shriek, suddenly, a high-pitched screech like that of a harbinger of evil owls came from Ralph's mouth. The screech sounded like a mournful wail, instilling disgust and fear in those who heard it. Peeves was startled. It groaned, like a deflated balloon, spinning forward in an arc, followed by a dull thud against the wall. Its body spun like a top, bouncing repeatedly between the corridor walls. Finally, a blood-curdling scream rang out, and Peeves, with a heart-wrenching cry as if his parents had died, cried out, "I will be back." The young Gryffindor wizards all stared intently at the blond boy, their hearts swaying with the flickering light in his hand. P.S. There's a bug in the original books regarding the entrance to Dumbledore's office. In the Goblet of Fire, it says the entrance to the headmaster's office is on the 3rd floor of the castle. The original text reads, "Harry took 3 steps at a time, went through the 2 oak doors, leaped up the marble stairs, and ran towards the 3rd floor, rushing towards a stone monster standing in the middle of the empty corridor." However, in the Half-Blood Prince, it's repeatedly mentioned that the entrance to the headmaster's office is on the 8th floor of the castle. Considering the frequent mentions of the 8th floor, and the fact that the Room of Requirement is located on the 8th floor, and Dumbledore mentions that he once discovered it had turned into a luxurious bathroom while looking for a toilet, this novel consistently states that the entrance to the headmaster's office is on the 8th floor of the castle. Chapter 18. Times have changed, sir. Without Peeves's interference, the group set off again, progressing smoothly. Ralph, the young and handsome badger, stood out like an anomaly among the Gryffindor lions, attracting countless glances and everyone wanting to chat with him. Ralph, What magic did you use against Peeves? Seamus Finnegan asked hastily. Imitating the call of the witchbird. I learned it from them, but I advise you not to try it lightly, Ralph kindly warned. Its call contains magic. Listening to it for too long will make you lose your mind. The infamous eccentric Ulrich once tried to prove that the witchbird's call was beneficial to wizards' health. He listened to it for 3 months straight, eventually becoming so confused that he wore it at Badger as a hat. Therefore, to protect wizards, the sale of witchbirds usually required the casting of a silent spell. But Ralph knew his warning was useless. The more forbidden it was, the more the lion cubs would try the taboo. Gryffindor students seem to have an exceptionally strong rebellious streak. Even if you tell them they can't drink hot drinks in the toilet, they might still try it, perhaps with a straw. Fortunately, Ralph's veterinary clinic treats wizards, and he's prepared to tearfully welcome his first patients, while also snapping up a bunch of wretched birds at a low price. It's my turn to ask a question. No, it's my turn. You've already asked several. Parvati Petier, of Indian descent, and Lavender Brown, of Scottish descent, started arguing. Both of their regions historically had a strong obsession with independence from Britain, and they used to get along very well, but because of Scamander, they're almost enemies. Ralph is truly wicked. Hermione found herself almost pushed to the edge, having originally stood next to Ralph. The little girl tiptoed, glancing at Ralph chatting and laughing in the crowd. She wanted to warn everyone not to be deceived by his innocent appearance. Stay away from this scoundrel. Unfortunately, no one paid her any attention. Of course, nobody cared. A wizard's excellence is judged by comparison. If someone is only good-looking, they're just a pretty face, all show and no substance. Ralph was not only good-looking, but he also displayed formidable strength when dealing with Peeves. In contrast, the Gryffindor boys tonight were utterly pathetic. Like the boy who lived, everyone wanted to see him show off, but they ended up looking pathetic. On the way to the 8th floor, Ralph was asked countless questions, which he answered one by one with a smile, perfectly embodying Hufflepuff's good temper. When everyone thinks you're a good-natured, honest person, then if something unexpected happens at school, no one will suspect you. Honesty was Ralph's best cover. Upon reaching the 8th floor, there was a fork in the road. The left path led to the Gryffindor Tower, while the right path led to the entrance to the headmaster's office. Since you're already here, why not sit in the Gryffindor common room, a witch advised. If you don't like it, you can sleep there tonight. Yeah, why not just not go back to Hufflepuff? Ralph broke out in a cold sweat. If he really stayed in the Gryffindor common room, he'd be expelled from Hogwarts tomorrow. Witches, ugh, you're trying to ruin me, destroy my resolve. Professor Dumbledore is waiting for me, Ralph firmly refused. I'm leaving. Hermione, goodbye, he waved to a corner of the crowd, turning away with a dashing back view. Hermione hesitated for a moment, then waved back weakly, saying, goodbye. When she looked up again, she found many witches staring at her. That bastard, he's deliberately setting me up again. Hermione snorted, slightly raising her chin, haughty like a white goose, and walked alone through the crowd towards the common room. Ralph turned a corner and stopped in front of a gigantic, hideously ugly stone monster. Jelly Slug, the boy uttered the command Professor McGonagall had given him. The command might be too childish for a young wizard, but it was perfect for Dumbledore. Jelly slugs are awful. I don't know why Dumbledore likes them, Ralph muttered. I think so too, the gargoyle guarding the door grumbled. The headmaster has terrible taste. After his grumble, the gargoyle jumped aside, splitting the wall behind it in two. Ralph slowly entered, ascended the magical staircase, and arrived at an oak door. He was about to push it open when he was drawn to the brass griffin-shaped door knocker. It looked like a door knocker, but it was indeed a door knocker. However, this door knocker was a powerful magical artifact. If any wizard attempted to force their way through the headmaster's office door, it would transform into a brass griffin and attack. The griffin, a magical creature native to Greece, possesses the forelimbs, wings, and head of an eagle, and the body, hind legs, and tail of a lion. Like the Sphinx, griffins were used by wizards to guard treasures and secrets. However, griffins were rare and powerful, making it impossible for everyone to have one to protect their wealth. As a second choice, ancient Greek wizards invented this door knocker. Later, with Alexander's eastward conquests, the magical world of the Near East entered the Hellenistic era, and this magical item spread. Why did Rolf know this so clearly? He also had such a magical item in his little black leather suitcase, capable of repelling intruders, but compared to the brass door knocker in the principal's office, it was far inferior in both power and craftsmanship. If this was a masterpiece, his was at best a defective product of modern magic. Ralph was captivated by it, touching it again and again, 18 times, until it almost developed a patina. Sigh, well, sooner or later I'll go to Greece and capture a real griffin to guard my home. Ralph pushed open the oak door, squinted, and glanced around the office, immediately feeling petty. The griffin door knocker was for guarding treasure, so what it guarded was naturally far more valuable than the knocker itself. The principal's office was indeed a treasure trove. A spacious, beautiful circular room came into view. At night, it wasn't lit by candles, but by shimmering crystals and aquamarine cat's eye lights. The room was as bright as day, but crucially, the light was soft. Even after a long time, it wouldn't cause eye strain or fatigue. A mahogany bookshelf occupying one wall held many magical books, many of them appearing ancient, made of parchment and papyrus. On the windowsill hung dozens of thin, golden bells, their melodious sounds carrying the power to predict the weather for the coming year, extremely precious magical items. In the corner, there was a mirror-like object reaching the ceiling, its surface concealed by a red curtain. On one side of the mirror was a long, narrow table, upon which sat many strange silver objects, spinning and emitting wisps of smoke. Ralph reached out and gently brushed away the smoke, which swirled around his palm. With his limited knowledge, he couldn't recognize the names or uses of the silver instruments. But he knew they couldn't be humidifiers, could they? The walls were covered with portraits of the former headmasters, both male and female, all gently snoring in their frames, occasionally half opening their eyes to steal glances at Ralph. There was also a huge table in the room, its legs claw-shaped. On a shelf behind the table sat the Sorting Hat. "Oh, we meet again, the Sorting Hat," Ralph chuckled as he approached. "Have you figured out the answer?" Before the boy could get close, the Sorting Hat bared its teeth and yelled, "Don't come any closer." "Hey, kid, what did you do to damage the Sorting Hat so badly?" An old man with a goatee, dressed in silver and green Slytherin attire, asked curiously. Ralph glanced at the plaque beneath the portrait, which read, Phineas Nigellus Black, 1847 to 1925. "Hey Headmaster Black, you can drink potions however you want, but you can't say whatever you want. The Sorting Hat and I are good friends." "I haven't heard it, huh? A good friend like that's afraid of you," Phineas scoffed. "You didn't give it a big hit during the sorting, did you?" Ralph rolled his eyes. "Hey kid, what's your name? Which house are you from?" "Ralph Scamander, Hufflepuff, of course," Ralph said. Several Hufflepuff headmasters opened their eyes, sized up their new student, and nodded in satisfaction. It seemed the Hufflepuff's good looks remained as consistently impressive as ever. But many more headmasters huddled together, whispering amongst themselves. They seemed to have heard Ralph's name not long ago. "So you're the guy listed in the book of admissions who almost went to Ivermorny School of Witchcraft and Wizardry?" Phineas asked in surprise. "Dumbledore even wrote to your grandfather to invite you to Hogwarts." "I don't understand," a large, red-nosed wizard roared, waving his fist. "Why would a student want to give up the 1,000-year-old Hogwarts and go to a backward school in the New World?" Ralph glanced at the red-nosed headmaster and explained, "Sir, in last year's magical education assessment, 11 renowned magical schools were selected, but Hogwarts only ranked 7th, almost at the bottom." Ralph sighed. "Ivermorny is consistently in the top 2 in every ranking. It's not even in the same league anymore, Headmaster. Times have changed. Degeneration, shameful degeneration." The red-nosed headmaster couldn't catch his breath and fainted. Ralph was stunned. "Merlin's beard, he's too direct. Will he be expelled?" Thanks to Muse and Financial Man for the 10,000 coin donation, and thanks to Jiajian for the donation. Chapter 19. You think you're so great? You're so arrogant. The evaluation of magical school education is led by the Department of Education of the International Wizarding Federation. Rankings are based on each school's faculty strength, teaching standards, output, and the quality of its graduates. Hogwarts has no problem with funding, given the support of the British Ministry of Magic and the Board of Governors, but its teaching standards are a big question mark. Yes, the school boasts a legendary Transfiguration professor, a charms teacher who won a dueling championship, and a herbalist. Its strengths are prominent, but its weaknesses are even more pronounced, A divination teacher who seems like a fraud, a soon-to-retire history of magic professor who, even as a ghost, is exploited, and a defense against the dark arts teacher who changes every year. Defense against the dark arts, in particular, has a reputation in magical schools and the wizarding job market that there are only two kinds of defense against the dark arts positions, Hogwarts and everyone else. At other schools, it's a highly sought-after and well-paid position, extremely competitive, with everyone vying for it. But with a qualifier Hogwarts, it becomes a bottomless pit, bar none. After all, at other schools, you might at most be dismissed, but at Hogwarts, it could be your life. Truly talented wizards wouldn't apply to Hogwarts, so it's no surprise that the students' defenses against the dark arts are far below average compared to other schools. With such a teaching staff, even the best students would be wasted. It would be absurd for Hogwarts to rank high in educational assessments. Not to mention the outdated textbooks, no updates, no corrections, even ghosts like Professor Binns are still using textbooks from the era before his death. Hogwarts' 7th place ranking in educational assessments is probably only due to its millennium-old reputation and the influence of Dumbledore, the Grand Master of the Guild. Lies don't hurt, the truth is the sharpest knife. After Red-Nosed Fosco fainted from anger at Ralph, Headmaster Evera angrily exclaimed, "Has Hogwarts fallen this low? When I was in charge, it was ranked number 1, Deli's Daventer sighed, adjusting her glasses. Back then, the whole world was proud of Hogwarts. Look at it now. Sigh, it's truly declined. What level is Hogwarts at now? Just a few professors. Even Quirrell and the like are teaching defense against the dark arts. Can we teach that? No way, Uprasia roared. Next, the ranking will be lower than Bogsplittons, then lower than Durmstrang. It can't go any lower. They've lost all shame. Who is the greatest headmaster of Hogwarts? I don't need to tell you, do I? Phineas Black sneered. From now on, if anyone dares to nominate Dumbledore and say he's greater than me, I'll smear the rankings in their face. Phineas, Armando Dippert reminded him, Hogwarts started falling out of the top 5 under your watch. What do you mean? Armando, are you really that clean? Phineas retorted sarcastically. The Chamber of Secrets attack happened during your tenure, almost causing the school to close, and the Void was also trained by you when you were headmaster. All the male and female headmasters started arguing, blaming each other for Hogwarts' decline. The Sorting Hat was dumbfounded. Why were they fighting all of a sudden? Ralph was definitely a menace. He had to be expelled immediately. Ralph was unaware of the Sorting Hat's thoughts. He had already concealed his merits and quietly distanced himself from the headmaster's clamor. The boy's gaze was drawn to the only creature in the room, a phoenix, as large as a swan, perched on a tall, gilded branch, its bright red and gold feathers dazzling. Ralph recognized this strange magical creature at a glance. He walked over and slowly reached out to touch Fawkes' beautiful tail feathers, but it turned its head, staring sharply at the boy. It seemed that if Ralph dared to touch it, it would peck out his eyes. So, it wouldn't let him touch it? You're so great, so arrogant. Knowing the phoenix loved seafood, Ralph pulled out several pieces of sea hair from a pocket in his robe. Sea hairs weren't rabbits or squid, but a type of mollusk. Their shells had degenerated into internal shells, with a thin, transparent, white, pearly-looking outer layer on their backs. Fawkes was instantly drawn by the aroma. It flapped its wings lightly, leaving its perch on the branch and landing on Ralph's shoulder. Ralph handed it the sea hair, and simultaneously, with lightning speed, touched Fawkes' rear end. Ah, so bouncy, so firm. Suddenly, a ding sounded in the boy's mind, detected one of Dumbledore's guardian phoenixes, triggering side quest 1, capture Fawkes, reward, pure tears. Your tears will have the magical effect of phoenix tears, capable of healing injuries. Side quest 2, complete 100% taming of Fawkes. Reward, phoenix rebirth. After suffering fatal damage, Fawkes can be reborn as a juvenile in flames. Quest incomplete. Sure enough, the Minotaur system triggered again. If it were a wild phoenix, it probably wouldn't give such a generous reward, at most a few tail feathers. But Fawkes has an owner, so it's instantly different. However, not only is the system greedy, but Ralph is also greedy for Fawkes' body. Among all magical creatures, the phoenix is definitely the top pet. They possess powerful flames, their magical songs can uplift spirits and dispel fear, their tears have healing properties, and they are even immortal, able to help block bullets in crucial moments, effectively preventing wild imaginations. If Ralph can tame a phoenix and obtain the magic, Phoenix Rebirth, he can then directly take Avada Kedavra's attack face to face, since he can be reborn anyway. So the question is, where can he adopt such a wonderful pet? The answer is, it depends on luck. Phoenixes have always voluntarily chosen masters, none have been forced into taming by wizards. These magical creatures, elegant and powerful, will not be forced to submit to any wizard's power. They only submit to fate. When fate arrives, they are there. In other words, phoenixes are more about the dramatic act of a tiger's body trembles, and it bows down in worship, to the point that in the vast magical world, there are only two phoenixes that have chosen masters, one named Spark, who became the mascot of the New Zealand Quidditch team, the Matori Macaws, the other is Dumbledore's fox. Seeing the Phoenix Rebirth magical reward given by the system, Ralph could only stare helplessly. But the absence of a phoenix didn't mean he couldn't cultivate a relationship first. After Dumbledore's death, he, as an honest man, could take over Fox. Or perhaps it wanted to lay eggs. Ralph could take advantage of his proximity and help raise its offspring. Ralph then took out his treasured stockpile and fed it all to Fox. Just as he was using every trick in the book to please the old phoenix, a hand suddenly patted his shoulder. The man said gently, "This is the first time I've seen Fox eat food offered by a stranger. It seems it likes you very much." Dumbledore had appeared beside Ralph at some point, put his arm around the boy's shoulder, sniffed, and said, "It smells so good." Ralph looked up, held up the sea hare in his hand, and smiled at the old man. This is a Mediterranean sea hare, raised only on red algae, which gives it a rose-red color and a fragrant aroma. If the food hadn't been so delicious, Fox wouldn't have let Ralph touch it so easily. Of course, this isn't the best food, the boy clicked his tongue. I know an ingredient, the giant squid from the North Sea. It can only be caught in the deep sea, and its taste is incomparable to ordinary squid. The preparation is also very simple, special butter crab roe sauce, a little Greek extra virgin olive oil, Bordeaux white wine, and a special Italian touch. I have the ingredient, and I've made it a few times. The taste is absolutely authentic. Fox suddenly found the sea hare in its mouth tasteless. It stared at Ralph, then suddenly turned and lowered its head, picking up a few detached phoenix tail feathers from its nest and placing them in Ralph's hand. "Fox wants to trade its feathers with you so you can cook it, a giant squid," Dumbledore chuckled. "A few tail feathers aren't enough. The cost of just the giant squid alone is exorbitant," Ralph sighed. "However, I'll lose a little money just to make you, Fox, my friend. Fox, if you want some next time, you can come find me anytime." Ralph glanced at Fox's shiny feathers. Since he couldn't have Fox's body for the time being, he decided to pluck this old phoenix bald first, thanks to this life is short and tiring and lonely nest for their generous donations. Chapter 20: The Belated Acceptance Letter. Ralph claimed he wasn't doing it for money, but just to make a friend, yet he still managed to steal a few more phoenix feathers from Fox's nest. He planned to use them to make quills. Quills made from phoenix feathers were warm in winter and cool in summer, with a built-in cleaning function, the fire arrows of the pen's world. Of course, if there were any left over, he could also have Ollivander make a batch of ones with Fox feather cores, all twin cores to Voldemort's U-wand. That way, if Voldemort were to be resurrected and Ralph fought him, the identical cores would automatically create a flashback spell between the wands. Even if he wasn't a match for Voldemort, he could at least hold his own. It was practically an essential item for survival. Dumbledore watched Ralph picking up feathers, a kind smile appearing on his face. He found the boy quite interesting, unlike Newt when he was young, who was quiet, somewhat withdrawn, and blushed easily when teased. The old man released his hand from the boy's shoulder, turned, and sat down in a chair, gesturing for Ralph to sit as well. "You're making me a little hungry. How about some late-night snacks, Ralph? How about lemon ice cream or honey cake? Eating too many sweets at night is bad for your teeth and makes you fat." Ralph shook his head and refused. "A cup of tea will do." Dumbledore took out his wand and tapped it lightly. Immediately, a spinning tea tray and a plate of ice cream appeared in the air. "My right tooth has been a bit sore lately. Madame Pomfrey warned me not to eat too many sweets, or I'll get cavities." Dumbledore picked up a piece of lemon ice cream, took a bite, and blinked. "But it's really delicious." Ralph picked up the teacup with its crackled ice, took a sip of tea, and advised, "A small hole left untreated will become a big problem. You should go see a doctor soon. The potions for toothaches at the university hospital are all brewed by Professor Snape, but those potions, Dumbledore shook his head, deliberately lowering his voice, as if revealing a great secret. They all taste awful. Ralph raised an eyebrow. If even Dumbledore said they tasted bad, then they really must taste bad. Looks like he'd have to be careful when going to the school clinic in the future. The boy thought for a moment and said, "Actually, we could try other treatments." The old man leaned forward, asking curiously, what methods? Ralph had originally planned to introduce his Celia's magical animal shop, and then use the opportunity of treating Dumbledore's teeth to give the students a hardcore advertisement. "Look, even Dumbledore is coming to me for treatment, so why don't you all hurry up and send your pets over?" But Ralph suddenly remembered that he was a veterinarian, and had already offended the Sorting Hat and many former headmasters. He also had to consider the current headmaster. Otherwise, what if he really got expelled? The boy coughed and cleverly changed his tune, saying, "You could check out a Muggle clinic. Their modern medicine is actually beyond the imagination of many wizards. Hermione's father is a dentist, and she says he's very skilled." "Oh, Miss Hermione Granger? I'll definitely go see her father when I have time." Dumbledore scrutinized Ralph and suddenly asked, "You seem to have a high opinion of Muggle things." "Not exactly high opinion, but each has its advantages and disadvantages." Ralph pressed 2 fingers against the thin, white, translucent teacup, gazing at the tea surface, and said softly, "Many wizarding spells are indeed convenient, like the unseen stretching charm, but in many ways, they are far inferior to Muggle technology. Like Hogwarts, which still uses medieval candles and oil lamps, while Muggles entered the electrical age long ago. Wizarding telescopes can only observe the solar system, while Muggles can already explore galaxies billions of light years away." Hearing this, Dumbledore let out a soft "A," seemingly surprised. Children from wizarding families often harbor a sense of arrogance and haughtiness towards Muggles. Even those with a slight fondness for Muggles rarely bother to learn about their lives and technology. Even the Weasley family, famously fond of Muggles, with Arthur Weasley being a fanatic, only had a superficial understanding, leading to many comical situations. Even their Muggle studies professor couldn't quite distinguish between a telephone and a recorder, since both produced sound. Ralph, from the Scamander family, possessed such knowledge at such a young age, truly surprising Dumbledore. It was only in middle age, after experiencing a series of upheavals, that he decided to settle down and learn about this equally remarkable group. The two chatted for a while longer. Ralph talked about Muggle technology, and Dumbledore shared anecdotes from the wizarding world, both listening with great interest. Dumbledore, in particular, carefully observed the boy, noticing his composed demeanor and clear thinking. The old man nodded subtly, as if he had discovered an interesting individual. After their casual conversation, Ralph took a golden letter from his pocket. One end of the envelope was sealed with sealing wax, which bore an embossed image of a Niffler. "Professor Dumbledore, this is a letter my grandfather asked me to deliver to you." This was why Dumbledore had summoned Ralph to his office on the first day of school. He was a messenger. The headmaster removed the wax seal, opened the envelope, and quickly skimmed the contents of the coded letter, his brow furrowing. Ralph sat silently in his chair, sipping his tea. He hadn't read the letter, but he knew what Newt had written. Dumbledore adjusted his half-moon spectacles, looked up, and slowly said, "Ralph, did you also go to the Albanian forest with Newt this summer?" The boy nodded. During the summer vacation, they had accepted an invitation from the Albanian Ministry of Magic to investigate the mass animal deaths in the Albanian forest. Ralph knew it was Voldemort lurking in that forest. His ghostly possession of animals drastically shortened their lifespans. Of course, Ralph knew even better that Newt was sent by Dumbledore as his little spy to gather information about the Dark Lord. "By the way, I also ran into Professor Quirrell. He's also entered the Albanian forest," Ralph said. I see." Dumbledore smiled, changing the subject. "When you returned to England from Romania, were you checked by the Ministry of Magic?" "They checked my trunk, but didn't find anything wrong." Ralph shrugged. "That's actually your grandfather's fault," Dumbledore chuckled. "Newt likes to run around with a bunch of magical creatures. He's been to several cities, and there have been escape incidents in all of them. His grandson came back from the Dragon Sanctuary, so naturally the Ministry of Magic was a little nervous, afraid you might also be carrying dragons or something." Ralph was speechless. This terrifying slander and preconceived prejudice was something even he couldn't refute. After all, it was all the truth. "So, Ralph, I don't want the magical creatures in your box running around, understand?" Dumbledore's smile faded. I allow you to keep magical creatures at Hogwarts, but there can't be any more attacks on students, Dumbledore said seriously. You have to keep them under control. I don't want to see you expelled like your grandfather. The portraits of the old headmaster had long since stopped arguing. They were all listening intently to the conversation. When they heard about expulsion, Phineas even grunted a few times in support. Dumbledore raised his hand, adjusted his sleeves, shifted his posture slightly, and pulled a letter from the table. This is your acceptance letter. You've been in Romania and then went to Albania. The owls couldn't cross the sea to find you. It's late, but I still have to give it to you. Ralph took the letter, which read, to Mr. Ralph Scamander, Headmaster's Office, Hogwarts. The back was a wax seal, a shield emblem, and a capital H surrounded by a lion, an eagle, a badger, and a snake. Ralph pulled out the letter and read, Headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Albus Dumbledore, President of the International Magical Union, President of the Wizarding Association, First-Class Wizard of the Order of Merlin. Dear Mr. Scamander, we are pleased to inform you that you have been admitted to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Ralph smiled contentedly. Without this, something did seem missing. But a belated acceptance letter was still an acceptance letter, better than some people whose acceptance letters might be forever late. Dumbledore smiled and said, Child, feel free to come and sit here often when you have time. I enjoy listening to you talk about muggles. I understand. Goodbye, Headmaster. Goodbye, Fawkes. Ralph stood up, bowed to the old man in thanks, and waved goodbye to the old headmasters on the wall. What a polite and well-behaved child. So endearing. Dumbledore's expression grew even more amiable, and he nodded gently with a smile, saying, Go ahead, you should still make it to the Hufflepuff prefect introduction ceremony. The boy turned and left the headmaster's office. Dumbledore stood up, watched the boy leave, closed the door, and then sat back down. The old man looked out the window, gazing at the night view alone. He glanced again at the letters on the table, and his smile slowly faded. Chapter 21 The Wind Rises. Night deepened. Dumbledore sat at the table, his slender fingers gently twirling Newt's carefully crafted secret letter, his brow furrowed. The letter's main content was actually quite simple. Albania had been peaceful this summer. Peaceful meant something was amiss, even something bad, because lurking in that dark forest was a wandering ghost whom everyone thought was long dead. Voldemort. Dumbledore had always known this, even though he had visited Albania several times and hadn't found that wandering ghost. But he just knew. Over the past decade, large numbers of animals had been dying mysteriously in Albania's forests, so much so that it had attracted the attention of the Ministry of Magic, and over time, the locals had begun to take it for granted. Therefore, when that dark forest suddenly fell silent, and the death ceased, it meant Voldemort's departure. But the world was too vast. Even if the Dark Lord had left Albania, there were too many places he could go. Where would he go? Dumbledore pulled 2 more letters from the drawer, placing the 3 letters side by side on the table. One letter was from Gringotts, an apology from the goblins. Dumbledore's vault had been broken into by a wizard. Although nothing was stolen, the goblins wanted to pay compensation and hoped he wouldn't pursue the matter, allowing them to continue using their absolutely safe vault. Another letter was from Minister for Magic Fudge. He was very sorry for not catching the wizard who broke into Gringotts, but said he wouldn't give up. Dumbledore's greatest skill was gathering intelligence, meticulously sifting through a multitude of true, false, invalid, or insignificant pieces of information to find truly useful clues and connect them. From these 3 letters, Dumbledore could easily draw an obvious conclusion. After leaving Albania, the Dark Lord returned to England and found a capable assistant, an assistant powerful enough to infiltrate Gringotts and even evade the Ministry of Magic's pursuit. Dumbledore stood up, hands behind his back, by the window, gazing down into the distance. Hogwarts, under the cover of night, had fallen silent, like a sleeping dragon. But the old man knew that the Dark Lord was lurking somewhere nearby, spying on the sleeping dragon. The reason was simple: the Philosopher's Stone was there. Whether the news of the Philosopher's Stone being in the vault or at Hogwarts was actually spread by Dumbledore. Rather than letting Voldemort, who had left Albania, disappear without a trace, it was better to have him under his watchful eye. Dumbledore could then further observe the Dark Lord's state, investigate the secret of his immortality, and verify some of his suspicions. Of course, he could also use him to train and hone those he wanted to cultivate. The half-dead Dark Lord was the best whetstone. Just then, The door was pushed open again, and Snape stormed in. "I just ran into Scamander on the road. He said you didn't punish him." "Punish him?" Dumbledore didn't turn around, but stood with his hands behind his back, saying softly, "Did Mr. Scamander do anything wrong?" "What did he do wrong?" Snape snapped. "He brought a matra rat and attacked an innocent student, but as far as I know, Goyle and Crabbe insulted Longbottom's parents first, and Malfoy broke into someone else's carriage and tried to throw his luggage off the train." Dumbledore turned to Snape and said, "There three seem to be more at fault. Besides, Professor McGonagall has already written to the Ministry of Magic to determine whether Scamander was carrying a matra rat." "We all know what happened," Snape rudely interrupted the headmaster, pacing back and forth in the room. "Scamander's trunk is dangerous. There are definitely many other dangerous magical creatures in it. Aren't you worried about the safety of the other students? We need to effectively monitor his trunk." Dumbledore remained calm, staring at the wind chimes on the windowsill that seemed to predict the weather, as if the trunk was less important than whether it would rain tomorrow. "I agreed to let Ralph bring the trunk to Hogwarts. He can keep some relatively safe magical creatures there." "You agreed?" Snape was almost incredulous. The boy was originally going to Hermione School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, where his mother is a professor. Dumbledore reached for the wind chimes, smiling. "For some reasons, Hogwarts' reputation has suffered slightly in recent years, and its academic atmosphere isn't as strong as Hermione's, leading many parents to prefer their children there. Actually, we're not that far off." Hearing this, not only the old headmasters hanging on the walls, but even Snape felt embarrassed. A school ranked fourth from the bottom, trying to piggyback on the top two, huh? "So, Hermione doesn't agree to Scamander keeping magical creatures, and you're using that as a condition to attract him to Hogwarts?" Snape's voice was thick with sarcasm. "Yes, just an ordinary student," Snape scoffed. "Is that all you're concerned about? Every great wizard started as an ordinary person," Dumbledore said calmly. Snape looked annoyed and unconvinced. "Actually, it's not just Ralph. I'm willing to give all students appropriate tolerance within a safe and controllable range," Dumbledore sighed. "It's about protecting their nature and allowing them to grow more freely, to do what they want, instead of being completely bound by school rules. Isn't that a teacher's responsibility?" Snape looked at Dumbledore, and for some reason, he suddenly thought of Lupin the werewolf. If it weren't for this old man, he probably would never have been able to attend Hogwarts. "Of course, it's not just that. I think more students come to Hogwarts to cultivate enough talent." Dumbledore looked at Snape, who was still deep in thought, and said softly, "You know, Voldemort will return sooner or later. When he returns, we need enough power to protect everyone." Snape looked terrified. He hadn't heard that name in almost 10 years. "He's coming back." "I don't know," Dumbledore shook his head. "But please keep an eye on Quirrell for me." Quirrell. Upon hearing the name, Snape felt a chill run down his spine. He hadn't noticed anything amiss. If Quirrell was truly suspicious, he was too good at disguising himself, managing to escape Dumbledore's notice. Dumbledore was certain Quirrell was suspicious. He wasn't like this before, and although he had gone to Albania in the summer, he hadn't mentioned it when he applied for a job, only saying he had gone to the Black Forest in Africa. These anomalies were enough to make Dumbledore wary, especially since, according to his deduction, Voldemort had found a powerful ally. "By the way, Severus, have you seen Harry?" Dumbledore asked. "Yes," Snape shook his head violently, as if shooing away an annoying fly. "He looks just like his mediocre, arrogant, haughty, attention-seeking, and rude father, James Potter, but his eyes are like his mother's, practically identical to Lily's." Dumbledore sighed. "More than 10 years have passed. Do you still remember the shape and color of those eyes?" "I remember." Snape slumped into his chair, clutching his tear-streaked face, his expression twisted and contorted. "Over the years, I've seen him many times in my dreams." Dumbledore walked over, patted the middle-aged man's trembling shoulder, and sighed. "Then protect Harry." After Snape left, Dumbledore pulled out a stone from somewhere, tapping it lightly between his index fingers, producing a crisp sound. However, the blood-red stone was dull, its color almost completely gone, like mere rubble. It was like bait, hanging around the dragon's neck, luring the Dark Lord lurking within Hogwarts. This was a game of theft. Dumbledore knew Voldemort would come to steal. Voldemort also knew Dumbledore knew he would come to steal. Dumbledore, in turn, knew Voldemort knew he knew. This was a game of endurance and intellect, a test of skill. Fortunately, Dumbledore had never lost in his life, while Voldemort was a defeated fugitive. The bell at the window rang, signaling an impending downpour. Dumbledore stood by the window, watching the rising cold wind, gazing up at the sky, his expression desolate. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 22 Unlucky Scamander. Ralph realized tonight was probably his unluckiest night. First, he ran into Professor Snape as he left the headmaster's office. After a sarcastic remark, the professor deducted 5 points from Hufflepuff for Ralph's loud footsteps disturbing the Slytherin students' rest. Merlin's briefs. Mrs. Ralph was on the 8th floor, and the Slytherin common room was below the Black Lake. With that vertical distance, even if he set off fireworks on the roof, the snakes wouldn't hear him. Why didn't he mention that his greasy hair smelled bad and affected the air quality, bothering the Hufflepuff wizards? Of course, Ralph didn't say this aloud. He didn't want to lose 20 points from Hufflepuff and get grounded on his first night of school. Then, when the boy tried to return the way he came, he suddenly realized he was lost. Hogwarts has 142 staircases, all of which are movable. There's no such thing as an original path. Some steps are veritable road killers. They suddenly disappear when you step on them, only to reappear when you pull your foot back, and rise abruptly when you try to step over them, almost a provocation. Some paths are blocked by walls. You have to poke the right spot for them to open, otherwise they're as solid as a rock. As a novice, Ralph plunged headlong into Hogwarts' intricate staircase system, like wandering through a spider's web, the paths as dense as a spider's web, twisting and turning, each corner a trap. Even the best driving skills would get lost. It wasn't that he lacked ability, but rather that the enemies were too varied. He couldn't hold out for long before surrendering, repeatedly defeated by the tricky staircases. Ralph could easily imagine Ravenclaw's mischievousness, excitement, and wickedness when designing the staircases. She might even have frequently observed the young wizard's predicament through her crystal ball. Poor Ralph wandered around for a full 10 minutes, still circling on the 4th floor. He had no choice but to open the window, preparing to jump out and come back in from the 1st floor. Ralph was leaning near the window, about to climb out, when he suddenly turned his head to look into the corner. A skinny, dark gray cat stared at him with bulging, bulbous eyes. Upon seeing Ralph, it turned and ran, and Ralph quickly gave chase. As a senior professor at the Cat Academy, he had ample experience and skill in petting cats. At his fastest, he had won a cat's heart in a minute. Surely this cat knew the way better than Ralph? After chasing it for only 2 corridors, the cat disappeared. Ralph heard a faint sound, turned around, and was horrified. A hideous face appeared by the window. The person had hung a lantern on a cage frame on a pillar, but the light was dim, swaying in the wind, and then, with a poof, the light went out. The fleeting light added to the eerie atmosphere. Ralph had been terrified of Hermione all day, and now he was somewhat afraid himself. The man took down the lantern again, pulled a brand new, blood-red candle from his sleeve, lit it instantly, placed it in the lantern, and hung it back on the pillar. The lantern swayed slightly, its light flickering in the corridor. Filch, patrolling the night with a lantern, became excited upon seeing Ralph. He chuckled, caught a student out for a night on the first night of school. Well done, Mrs. Lawrence. Let's see which little rascal it is, sir. I am a student of Hufflepuff House. After the banquet, Dumbledore summoned me to his office, Ralph explained. Do you think I'd believe your lies? Filch sneered. Last year, I caught a Gryffindor student who claimed to have sleepwalking disorder and was sleepwalking, and a Ravenclaw student who, when I found him, was still stubbornly insisting he didn't want to disturb his roommates and wanted to study by the light in the hallway. I even encountered a Slytherin student who claimed he was kidnapped from his bed to the library's forbidden area by a dark wizard. Which of these excuses isn't more creative than yours? Your excuse is so overused, it's probably in the top 5 most frequent excuses I have caught sleepwalking students. Ralph was speechless. These excuses were going up to 2022 AD, he'd run out of reasons. But I didn't lie. You can go to Professor Dumbledore and prove I'm telling the truth. Still being stubborn? You're definitely trying to escape halfway through. I'm going to send you to Snape, Filch laughed. Regardless of whether the reason was true or not, given Snape's personality, he would deduct 10 points from anyone who wasn't a student of his house. Of all the professors at Hogwarts, only Snape appealed to Filch. If Filch were a professor, he'd hang a student from the ceiling and whip them with a belt. Even if I go to Professor Snape, you'll still have to take me to the headmaster's office, Ralph chuckled. He was just about to go in when I came back from the headmaster's office. Filch frowned, considering whether Ralph's words were true. Just as the warden was in a dilemma, Mrs. Norris, who was at his feet, suddenly sneezed several times, and her eyes became quite wet. Ralph observed Mrs. Norris and walked towards her. "Boy, what are you doing?" Filch roared. "Why are you so close? Your cat seems to be sick," Ralph explained. "Nonsense," Filch roared. "Under my care, Mrs. Norris is in excellent health," Ralph sighed, looking at the cat that kept sneezing. His voice wasn't loud, but his tone was firm. "Has it been sneezing and coughing intermittently lately, with watery eyes, increased nasal discharge, loss of appetite, and depression?" Filch opened his mouth, his throat a little dry. "Judging from your appearance, then it's definitely feline magical viral rhinotracheitis," Ralph shook his head, speaking in a professional tone. "This disease usually doesn't kill adult cats, but they suffer from it for a long time, which is very tormenting. Look how thin your cat is now." Filch panicked immediately. He glared at Ralph and said fiercely, "If you dare to lie to me, I'll have Professor Snape lock you in the dungeon." "Why would I lie to you?" Ralph casually revealed. "Sigh, just now in the headmaster's office, Dumbledore wanted me to do his dentistry. He complained that Professor Snape's potions tasted terrible. You can also take Mrs. Norris to the magical animals shop in Diagon Alley and see if their diagnosis matches mine. However, their treatments are expensive, while my fees are much cheaper, and their medical skills are not as good as mine. You can treat patients." Filch was very surprised. "Of course, every Scamander is the best veterinarian," Ralph smiled. Filch decided to send an owl to inquire tomorrow, but tonight. "Come with me. I'll take you back to the Hufflepuff Commons." "Thank you, Mr. Filch," Ralph said politely. Filch, carrying a lantern and the sickly Lady Loris in his arms, walked at the front. Although he was a squib, he was like a walking map, leading Ralph through several secret passages and bringing him to the first floor. "I'll find you at the Hufflepuff table tomorrow," Filch said. "No problem, I'll wait for you." Ralph waved and walked down the corridor toward the Hufflepuff Commons. But halfway there, he suddenly realized that he didn't know where the entrance to the Hufflepuff Commons was, let alone how to get in. All the foreplay was done, and he was just one step away from the final hurdle, but he couldn't find the entrance. What was going on? Ralph wandered aimlessly down the corridor and found a pile of large wooden barrels on a dark stone trough, with a boy sitting there. "Neville, what are you doing here?" Ralph asked in surprise. "Thank goodness, you're finally back, Ralph." Neville stood up and happily jogged towards the boy. "I was worried you wouldn't know how to get into house after coming back from the headmaster's office, so I've been waiting for you here." Ralph looked up, gazing intently into Neville's sincere eyes. He was used to indifference and was momentarily touched, almost unaccustomed to it. "Thank you," Ralph patted Neville on the shoulder. "No need to thank me, we're good friends," Neville chuckled, walking to the pile of barrels and whispering, "The prefect said the entrance to our house is behind these barrels. To enter the common room, you don't need to say a password, just tap the barrels to the rhythm of Helga Hufflepuff." Ralph watched Neville expectantly, only to see the boy draw his wand, tap the barrels twice, and then suddenly stiffen. "That's it?" Ralph asked. Neville hesitated for a moment, then said with a long face, "Rav, I think I've forgotten how to knock." Suddenly, a wooden bucket opened, and with a splash, the vinegar inside splattered onto their heads, soaking them completely. Chapter 23 Hufflepuff doesn't really need to farm. Unlike other houses, Hufflepuff's common room entrance has a built-in repelling device. Whenever a young wizard taps the barrel at the wrong rhythm, they're considered an intruder and subjected to waterboarding, a torrent of vinegar. Neville, perhaps born with a fish-like memory, only lasts 7 seconds. He'd long forgotten the rhythm his prefect taught him, so it was only natural that Ralph would get doused in vinegar. The last time Ralph was this unlucky was, well, you know. He still vividly remembers being tricked by a madwoman into catching soft-clawed prawns, only to be bitten in return. Soft-clawed prawns possess a curse magic. Any creature bitten by one will suffer misfortune for a week. Back then, the clueless Ralph didn't know this, and was then tricked into playing wizard chess by the same madwoman, losing 17 games in a row, losing even his underwear. Physically. As for who that madwoman was? Ralph's sister, Margaery, wasn't his biological sister, she was his great-aunt Queenie's granddaughter, a few years older than Ralph. Taking advantage of her age, her greatest pleasure was bullying the poor, honest Ralph. Fortunately, Margaery was in Ivermorny, and Ralph had come to Hogwarts, finally escaping her clutches. Of course, she was furious, especially since he had promised her a trip to Ivermorny during the summer holidays. Ralph stood in the corridor, reeking of jealousy, but for a moment, he was lost in thought, wondering what Margaery was doing. Soon, the entrance to the common room opened, and Hufflepuff students, hearing the alarm, came out to investigate. Ralph had already used a cleansing charm to wash away the jealousy from himself and Neville. The newcomer was Cedric. He looked at the two of them suspiciously and asked, "Are you alright?" "We're fine. Neville just forgot how to tap the barrels," Ralph explained. "We can't get into the lounge right now, I'll teach you." "Watch carefully." Cedric drew his wand and tapped the bottom of the second barrel in the middle of the second row. The lid spun open, revealing a narrow passage. Seeing Neville's bewildered expression, Cedric demonstrated again, then said gently, "Got it." Ralph nodded slightly. He closed his eyes and recalled for a moment. After the passage closed, he tapped the barrel rhythmically, without any vinegar spraying down. "Very good." Cedric turned and glanced at the round-faced boy, asking, "And you, Neville?" Neville frowned and sighed. "I only remember most of it, the last few steps. I can't quite remember them." "It's alright, I'll demonstrate it for you again. Watch carefully." Cedric was very patient, demonstrating it again before speaking gently. "And now, I only remember half the steps." Neville stood there, scratching his head, clearly feeling somewhat ashamed. "It's alright, we have plenty of time tonight." "I refuse to believe it." Cedric hadn't realized the seriousness of the problem and started banging on the barrel again. "And now, I only remember the first few steps." Neville gave a forced smile. "This time I'll be slower, and you have to follow along." Cedric's face darkened, but he remained patient, even demonstrating it 5 times for Neville to reinforce his memory before stopping. "And now," Neville looked up, grinned foolishly, and said, "I've forgotten everything." Ralph couldn't help but fassip him. "Are you trying to learn Tai Chi here, the kind of technique where no moves are the best moves, Cedric?" "I'll go back and teach Neville slowly." He had no choice but to say, "Well, that's all we can do." "Thank you, Ralph." Cedric wiped the sweat from his brow and took a breath. "I'll also encourage the other students to help Neville, with his memory so bad, if they didn't help him more." Cedric was afraid Neville would be sleeping at the door every day. The 3 of them entered the tunnel. Cedric, not wanting his 2 juniors to have a bad first impression of Hufflepuff, scratched his head and thought for a moment before saying, "This defensive device of ours isn't entirely without its advantages. Last year, Peeves destroyed the kitchen, and all the vinegar was contaminated. Only our house can use the freshest vinegar when we eat fish and chips. Also, if you're short on pocket money, you can find a big bottle to fill up with vinegar and sell it to the Hogshead at Hogsmeade. Our Hufflepuff vinegar is guaranteed to be safe." "The Hogshead, huh? It seems there's a serious food safety issue at this place, and it's located near the school. Is there no law? Who's the owner?" Ralph thought for a moment. "The owner seems to be Dumbledore's younger brother, Aberforth." "Oh well, that's all right then." The 3 walked to the end of the corridor, where a round wooden door stood with a brass knob in the center. Cedric lowered his voice and chuckled, "Welcome to the Hufflepuff common room." Opening the door, they found themselves in a cylindrical, tunnel-like common room. Ralph looked around. The room was painted in warm, earthy tones. On the opposite wall was a giant honey yellow wooden mantel carved with badger images. Inside, stone monster gargoyles serving as firewood racks had gaping mouths, revealing frightening throats. Above the fireplace hung a portrait of Hufflepuff, holding a small golden cup, with a house elf standing beside her. However, when Ralph looked again, the house elf had vanished. The boy was stunned. It was the first time he had ever seen a portrait of a house elf. The common room floor was covered with soft carpets, and many polished chairs and sofas were scattered around. In addition, swaying pothos and orchids hung from the ceiling. The aroma of plants, a fireplace, and brewing tea mingled with the earthy scent of the stone building, making this place feel less like a lounge and more like a small garden for afternoon tea. "You're late, come and sit down," Prefect Truman beckoned. Every year after the opening banquet, Hufflepuff House holds a welcome party for first-year students in the common room. both to foster camaraderie among the Badgers and to impart life lessons to the freshmen. This is a fine tradition not found in other houses, as they are all too far from the kitchen, unlike the Hufflepuffs who can easily obtain desserts and juices. At this moment, the party was drawing to a close, and the final Q&A session began. Seniors, are the courses at Hogwarts really that difficult? Hannah Abbott, with her 2 pigtails, was the first to raise her hand and ask, "Will I not be able to graduate if my grades are too bad?" "You won't be able to graduate," Prefect Truman explained with a smile. "One of my seniors only got 1 certificate in the AL exam, but he still graduated. If you don't graduate, the house will be even more anxious than you are. The heads of the house's bonuses are tied to the student's employment rate. They'll urge you to sign a 3-party agreement and find a job quickly." Many young wizards breathed a sigh of relief. In that case, first-year students could comfortably stay in their dormitories and laze around. "I heard that our headmaster, Professor Sprout, is a herbology teacher." Ernie Macmillan raised his hand, looking worried. "Do we really have to dig in the ground every day at Hufflepuff House?" "No need to dig in the ground every day. We're here to learn magic." Cedric stood up, and a small shovel accidentally fell out of his robe pocket. All the young wizards stared at the shovel, still covered in fresh soil. Cedric quickly bent down to pick it up, cleared his throat, and said, as a gardening enthusiast, "It's perfectly reasonable for me to carry a shovel, isn't it?" Chapter 24, Capturing an Older Cabgirl? A boisterous Hufflepuff dinner party lasted until late into the night. Led by the prefects, the young wizards returned to their respective dormitories. The Hufflepuff dormitories were undoubtedly the most comfortable of the 4 houses. The rooms were large, luxurious in Hufflepuff colors, with walls decorated with handcrafted siding and a large 4-poster yellow wood bed covered in flannel. Copper lamps inlaid with jewels cast a soft glow, and a red-gold fireplace kept the bed warm. Half-meter-tall pine trees grew on the round windows, emitting a faint fragrance conducive to deep sleep for the young wizards. Therefore, after a long journey and a night of revelry, sleeping in such a comfortable environment, Ralph didn't wake up until very late. Or rather, he was woken up. In the early morning, the Botricle, hanging upside down from the curtains of the 4-poster bed, saw Ralph motionless, having woken up much later than usual. It somehow produced a blade of grass and gently touched Ralph's nose, as if afraid he was dead. Ralph opened his eyes, then slowly closed them again, muttering, "Stop it, Groat. I'm so sleepy, I'll play with you later." The boy shifted his position, lying on his side on the bed, and pulled the blanket up to completely cover his head. The Botricle blinked its tiny eyes, and suddenly saw Ralph's bare feet. It immediately released the blanket, fell onto the covers, and then dashed over. Finally, the Botricle climbed onto Ralph's instep, stretched out its 2 long, thin arms, and swung up and down on them. The little guy was having a blast. Ralph felt a tickle in his feet. He pulled back the blanket, sat up, and glanced at the clock on the wall. It was only 8:30. It was already 8:30. Their class started at 9. His roommates were still asleep, and Neville was clinging tightly to his Raffer, muttering that Raffer shouldn't leave him, that he would be good to him for life. "Get up. We're going to be late." Ralph threw off the covers and sprang out of bed, so fast he flung the Botricle he was swinging on his feet. Groat tumbled onto the carpet, falling several times before finally sitting on the floor, arms crossed, sulking. Ernie Macmillan rolled over and whispered, "It's only a few o'clock, plenty of time. I'll sleep a little longer. Class starts in half an hour, and the first class is Professor McGonagall's Transfiguration." Ralph had already jumped out of bed and changed his clothes as fast as he could. "Neville, wake up." Seeing Neville still not getting up, Ralph shouted in his ear, "Your grandma's here." Neville instantly snapped awake, sitting bolt upright, his eyes filled with panic and fear. Ralph rushed to the bathroom. Men are always quick when it comes to washing up, whether before or after. He finished in just 5 minutes. His 2 roommates were even faster, they didn't even bother washing up. Walking down the street, Rove looked at Justin and Macmillan, whose eyes were still smeared with sleep, and asked, "You 2 went to class like this on the first day?" "It's okay, we'll wash them when we get back at noon," Justin Finley said nonchalantly. Ernie Macmillan, being a clean freak, vigorously rubbed his eyes and face to make himself look less greasy. Macmillan was still trying to reassure himself that he was just having a special morning and had to make do. He'd definitely get up early tomorrow. He seemed to remember something and frowned. "Justin, you didn't seem to wash your feet last night either." "I washed them the day before yesterday," Justin said matter-of-factly, even holding his right hand, which had been rubbing his feet, towards Macmillan's nose. "I smelled them this morning. They don't smell bad at all. You can smell them. They even have a pleasant fragrance." Macmillan covered his mouth, almost vomiting up everything he'd eaten the night before. Neville looked dejected, seemingly still recovering from the shock of "Rove's your grandma's here." Hufflepuff's advantage finally became apparent. They were just a few steps from the common room to the Great Hall, taking less than 3 minutes. Gryffindor and Ravenclaw students, on the other hand, had to navigate the stairs, risking getting lost and missing breakfast. Meanwhile, the other house's young wizards had mostly finished breakfast and were heading to their classrooms. Ralph encountered a group of Gryffindor students. Hermione, walking in the crowd, saw him and Neville and waved loudly, asking, "Why are you two so late?" "Our house is having a party until late," Ralph said, his eyes lingering on Hermione's bulging backpack. It was only the first day of school, and she was carrying so much. Many Gryffindor students, hearing that Hufflepuff was partying until late, looked on with envy. They had only been back in their quarters for a short time before Professor McGonagall sent them to bed. A group of Gryffindor witches were whispering amongst themselves. They had voted the previous night for the most handsome first-year boy, and Ralph had won. They were discussing how to gracefully bump into each other and strike up a conversation. Hermione, carrying her heavy backpack, swayed like a crab, head held high and chest puffed out, muttering, "How boring." When Ralph and the others reached the Hufflepuff table, they noticed that compared to other houses, there were very few Hufflepuff students in the Great Hall. Justin asked curiously, "Has everyone gone to class yet?" Prefect Truman, who had just finished eating and was on his way to class, explained upon hearing Justin's question, "Many people probably haven't gotten up yet. Won't they be late?" Macmillan asked. "No, our lounge is right next to the kitchen. We can order meals from the house elves in advance and have them delivered to our dorms the next morning," Truman revealed in her low voice, exposing the Academy's secret. "There are also secret passages in the kitchen that allow us to quickly reach each floor. If we get up 10 or 15 minutes earlier and are fast enough, we generally won't be late." Macmillan, who had been wondering why he came to Hufflepuff yesterday, exclaimed, "Hufflepuff is truly paradise." Prefect Truman, holding his textbooks, chuckled, "You'll understand once you've been in Hufflepuff for a while. Our academy prefers a slow pace and values a leisurely learning life." After breakfast, Ralph and the others hurried to the Transfiguration classroom, arriving with only 2 minutes to spare before class started. Ravenclaw, the school's most diligent student, had already arrived at the classroom early and even took out his textbook to preview the material for a short while. This was a stark contrast to Hufflepuff, the academy known for its laziness. Macmillan glanced around, not finding the stern witch, and breathed a sigh of relief. "Professor McGonagall isn't here. That's great. Find a place to sit," Justin said naturally, heading towards the last row. Rove, however, didn't go. He looked towards the first row, where the familiar girl with a ponytail sat, but there were no students beside her. The reason was simple: a cat sat on the table next to her, a beautiful tabby cat with excellent fur and a well-proportioned body. It was sitting there with its eyes closed, seemingly asleep. Just then, a sudden ding sounded in Rove's mind, detected a tabby cat-like older cat Giro, Minerva McGonagall, triggering side quest 1, pick up the tabby cat, gently awaken its sleeping soul, and stroke its head. Reward, McGonagall's shape-shifting talent, usable for 1 month. Side quest 2, complete the capture of the tabby cat. Reward, McGonagall's shape-shifting talent, usable for 1 year. Side quest 3, achieve 100% taming of the older cat Giro, Minerva McGonagall. Reward, McGonagall's shape-shifting talent, permanent. Quest incomplete. Ralph was speechless, standing frozen in place. "This damned system, do you even have any rice noodles? Are you trying to kill me?" Chapter 25 Petting Cats has risks. Be careful when petting cats. Ralph had faced countless choices, but none were as difficult as this one. Forget taming an older cat Giro, just the thought of picking up a tabby cat and gently awakening its slumbering spirit was terrifying. And that was Professor McGonagall. How many times did Ralph dare to mess with a cat? But, there's always a but, otherwise, there wouldn't be so many troubles in the world. Whether someone can do something difficult depends on the reward and the cost. If the reward far outweighs the cost, even the most difficult task will be worthwhile. So the question is the reward big enough? Just petting the cat would grant him Professor McGonagall's transfiguration talent, Even for just a month, the reward would be substantial. Professor McGonagall was undoubtedly one of the few transfiguration masters in the magical world. Her talent in transfiguration far surpassed that of a nobody like Ralph. Entering that realm of genius, even just forcibly opening a crack, struggling to squeeze in, and glimpsing it for a month would be an immense gain. To do it or not to do it, this question didn't involve life or death, but it did involve the possibility of being expelled. Luo Fu snapped out of his thoughts. Of course, he wouldn't be easily swayed by the system. He was a man of principle and wouldn't easily go against his own heart. So, the boy slowly walked towards the first row, his steps firm and powerful. Petting cats was his current inner desire. Shirley turned her head and glanced at Luo Fu, thinking the boy was going to sit next to her, so she packed her bag and made room for him. But Luo Fu feigned an attack, walked to the tabby cat, and scooped her up in his arms. He first tapped her head, forcibly waking the sleeping McGonagall, then grabbed the tabby cat by the scruff of her neck with one hand. Petting cats requires technique, it can't be rough or forceful. Preparation and skill are both important. As someone with rich experience in petting cats, Luo Fu's technique was quite skillful. He first rubbed and stroked the sensitive areas on the back of her neck, waiting for the cat's body to soften like liquid, then slowly moved downwards, going further. Luo Fu's movements were as smooth as flowing water, done in one go, like a top-notch master. Without having appraised hundreds of cats, one couldn't possess such skill. In that instant, Sherry's eyes widened, her mouth agape, utterly stunned. Last night, the Ravenclaw prefects had warned that the tabby cat in the Transfiguration class was Professor McGonagall in disguise, and that students shouldn't do anything out of line. For example, not using a quill pen as a cat toy. This was also why Ravenclaw students dared not sit in the front row. But Ralph was the real heavyweight, directly embracing her and taking deep, intense sniffs. The eaglets all looked up, watching the tabby cat open its eyes in alarm, then look at Ralph, completely absorbed in his cat sniffing, and finally stare intently at the now furious older cat Joel. When McGonagall realized she'd been picked up, she was nearly driven mad. For decades since learning Animagus, she had never experienced such a brutal embrace. No tail swish, no flattened ears, no threatening meows. The tabby cat, devoid of feline etiquette, simply leaped up and slapped Ralph's cheek with its paw. Hard. Unfortunately, Professor McGonagall didn't have long nails, and her frantic scratching only caused minor physical damage. Without even breaking Rove's nails, skin. This kind of attack only excited the cat lover more. Professor McGonagall even wanted to use the cat's signature moves, a series of head slaps and fierce hind kicks, to teach Rove what it means to pet a cat with risks, and to be careful when petting a cat. But Rove had already sensed the danger and immediately released the tabby cat. The cat plummeted downwards, her toes barely touching the table, her body lunging forward, performing a somersault in midair, and landing gently. The moment she landed, she had transformed into a serious-looking woman, wearing square glasses that looked exactly like the markings around the cat's eyes. She wore a black cloak, her jet black hair was tied in a tight bun, and her lips were tightly pursed, showing extreme anger. Professor McGonagall could no longer control her rage. But Rove's reaction was even more intense. He seemed startled, sitting in his chair, clutching his chest, as if he were about to have a heart attack. "Ah, Professor McGonagall? You, eh?" The cat, Ralph's arms trembled uncontrollably, twitching incessantly. Sherry looked at Ralph in confusion. She recalled the scene of the boy swatting spiders with his bare hands on the train, crushing mice with one hand, and even teaching the Malfoys a lesson. He didn't seem this frail, did he? Sherry frowned slightly, quickly realizing that Ralph was acting. She wanted to laugh, but was afraid that Professor McGonagall would notice, so she pretended to pour him some water. The girl was really struggling to hold back her laughter, her eyebrows curved like willow branches, extremely beautiful. "Ralph, are you alright?" Neville's acting was much more realistic, or rather, he genuinely thought Ralph was having an attack. His voice trembled, afraid that his newly acquainted friend was about to die. Professor McGonagall, who had been very angry, panicked instantly at Neville's wailing. The defense against the dark arts professor could die, they died every year anyway, like disposable magical consumables, but the students couldn't be harmed. Mr. Scamander, are you alright? Quick, get him to the school clinic. Ralph waved his hand with difficulty, pulled a small candy from his pocket, and swallowed it with Sherry's tea. A moment later, he felt better. It's an old ailment, nothing serious, I'll just have to tough it out. Cough cough. Ralph stood up, his Adam's apple bobbing slightly, and said apologetically, Professor McGonagall, I really didn't know that cat was you. In this situation, what could Professor McGonagall say? She couldn't be angry, she had to gently comfort him. It's alright, Mr. Scamander, it's all my fault, I scared you. Are you really alright? You don't need to go to the school clinic? Okay then, since you insist, quickly find a seat, class is about to start. Ralph sat down next to Sherry. The girl with the ponytail gave him a I've figured it out look. Ralph raised an eyebrow, responding with an innocent don't wrong an honest person expression. The girl with the ponytail rolled her eyes, mimicking Hermione. Neville didn't really want to sit in the front row, especially under Professor McGonagall's nose. Was this supposed to be the privileged area for a fool like him? But seeing Ralph and Sherry sitting there, he had no choice but to bite the bullet and sit down. After the farce, Professor McGonagall regained her stern demeanor and, as usual, reminded the students not to misbehave in class, or they would be expelled. The young wizards all looked at Ralph, clearly considering him the most likely to be expelled. This made Ralph very sad. Being misunderstood was never a pleasant thing. Of course, seeing the system notification that the task was completed instantly cheered Ralph up. A little trip to get expelled every day, life was endlessly enjoyable. As long as the reward was tempting enough, let alone petting Professor McGonagall's cat head, he'd even try Quirrell's back of the head, Snape's greasy hair, he'd dare to try. Alright, let's begin the lesson. Professor McGonagall looked around and asked, so, can anyone tell me what the 3 essential conditions are for successfully transforming an object? Almost no Hufflepuff students raised their hands. They had partied late into the night and almost arrived late this morning, unlike the Ravenclaw students who had all previewed the textbook and eagerly raised their arms. Lisa Dupin, Professor McGonagall called on a Ravenclaw girl. I am, Lisa Dupin said, imagination, abracadabra, and motion, correct, 2 points for Ravenclaw, McGonagall said. Imagination is crucial when transforming objects. We must visualize the transformed shape in our minds beforehand. Beginners should pronounce the incantation clearly. Any mistake or pause will cause the transformation to fail. Accurate movements are equally important. Avoid swinging or turning your wand unnecessarily, or the transformation will definitely fail. All the students took out their quills and began scribbling notes. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.